Good morning, Mr. Soni. Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Chairperson.
Good morning, Mr. Montana. You want to make sure that I don't hear you. That's why you don't put on your mic.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. Okay. Thank you for coming back. Okay, let's continue. But maybe before we continue, I just want to tell you, Mr. Montana, that, excuse me, I've asked the legal team to look at all the concerns that you have raised with the Commission and bring them to my attention so that we can look at them, each one on its merits. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I think we must just do the oath again.
Chair, I thought I was still under oath because I refused to do media interviews. I said, I'm not still under oath. I couldn't even speak to my family and said, I'm still under oath.
I think you were, but just in case. All right.
Please state your full names for the record.
Tsepo Lucky Montana.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath? Do you consider the oath binding on your conscience?
We can't hear you, I'm sure. Yeah, okay. Go back. Yeah, and start afresh.
Please state your name. Please state your full names for the record.
Tsepo Lucky Montana.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No,
Do you consider the oath binding on your conscience?
I do.
Do you solemnly swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you. You may proceed, Mr. Soni.
As you please, Chairperson. Chairperson, I'm obliged to place on record that we've received a letter from Mr. Tiro Holele about certain allegations Mr. Montana made about him. He wants to file an affidavit. I'm just bringing that to your attention. He complains that he was not given notice that those allegations were going to be made. We'll obviously tell him to file his affidavit.
Yes,
as
no,
soon as possible.
that's fine. You will attend to it.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Mr. Montana, can I just indicate to you the roadmap for today? And you might remember on Friday, I indicated to you that there were 4 sets of affidavits that you would need to respond to. We finished with Mr. Molefe's for most of it. Today I want to start with the affidavit of Mr. Dingazwaya, then I'll go to the affidavit of Ms. Ngoi, and then deal with the report of Mr. Alleman. Now, the affidavit of Mr. Dingazwaya is in bundle F, and it is exhibit SS8, and it is F and starts at page 96. Have you got that in front of you, Mr. Montana?
Indeed, Chair.
As previously, I do not go over all the allegations, just the allegations that concern you. And you know the process I follow, which is asking you what you admit you deny and what the basis of the denial is. Can I ask you to turn to page 97, paragraph 4? I think it's the next page. It's the black 97 now. You'll see on the left-hand side, page numbers.
Is that the one with the picture there?
No. It starts with affidavit, Mr. Dingazwaya.
Okay.
It's under divider 6.
I've got it, Chair, thank you.
Oh, okay.
You could turn to page 97. He says that paragraph 4, I should point out that it has long been known at PRASA that there are certain persons and entities that have wielded undue influence over some of the most senior persons at PRASA, starting with its former group chief executive officer, Mr. Lucky Montana. What is your reaction to that?
Chair, you'll see in my affidavit, which of course hasn't been considered, I totally reject this. It's not based on fact. I think that Mr. Dingiswayo's statement, in fact, confirms some of the things that I'm saying in my affidavit, but I'll come to that later.
Yes. Then he carries on in the next sentence. It is equally well known that if you cross Mr. Montana's path or attempted to ensure that things were done lawfully and properly insofar as these entities and individuals are concerned, he ruthlessly abused his powers and even arrogated to himself powers that he did not possess. Look at your reaction is the same.
Actually, it's laughable what he's saying there. Of course, I was the CEO of PRASA, and I was accountable for its performance to the board of PRASA. So management had ultimately, they supported me in fulfilling the mandate of the board. They were not independent of me. So if someone like Dingiswayo or Matangoy wanted to have a life of their own and pursue something that I didn't even instruct them to do, or it was not in line with our strategy, I had to act, Chair. So of course, it doesn't describe what is the, if you cross path. So I assume, Chair, that if you say cross path, you mean if you do wrong things with me, I'll deal with it. And I'll take it in that spirit, yes, Chair.
Well, I don't know whether that might be one meaning, but I suspect that from his point of view, he means if you resist something that Mr. Montana wants you to do because you think it's wrong, and you insist that things should be done properly, you are crossing his path. And I suspect that that's the intention, the meaning he intends.
No, Chair, I understand
You
that.
understand it, yeah.
Of course, people who want to project themselves as corruption bastards.
Yes.
That's how they present themselves. And in my affidavit, I go at great length to explain, in fact, what Mr. Dingiswayo, all the things that he did that are not lawful. And by the way, Chair, Mr. Dingiswayo didn't report to me. I've never even given him a single instruction. So it's very interesting that he can actually describe, even her own boss, Ms. Ngoye, never described me in those terms. So it's very interesting that we are dealing with hearsay rather than fact.
But I guess also what you are saying based on your earlier response is somebody in his position could level the accusation when you as the superior at work say, no, this is wrong, it shouldn't be done, and they believe it should be done. They might describe that still as, you would see that from their side, in resisting something you believe is lawful, that they would say you are abusing your powers when you act against wrongdoing.
Well, Chair, I think one of the major things is very interesting that it starts by saying certain entities. In fact, I think that in my affidavit, I demonstrate that that in fact, what he did in the legal department, which he didn't have the authority to do certain things, but they abused it to target certain entities and leave others. So if he was acting consistently and said this is a principle, is a policy of the company, I would understand. But if he targets certain entities and say, no, these are, because you see, Chair, at this time, it is quite clear that when Mr. Molefe was there, certain members of the executive when the relationship between myself and Mr. Molefe collapsed, certain people then aligned themselves, and therefore they were used to do certain things.
You
which
mean
is-
align themselves with Mr. Molefe?
with Mr. Molefe?
Yeah.
In
And I
that-
guess others align themselves with you.
Indeed, Chair.
Yeah.
So you'll see that if you go to another executive, so this is, there's a context to all of this, but I don't agree with what he's saying, Chair.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay.
Then in paragraph 9, he says, there is one specific matter in respect of which I wish to give details, as it illustrates quite graphically the manner in which PRASA operated during the period Mr. Montana was its group CEO. And that's what he's going to deal with. In effect, as you'll see in the rest of the affidavit, in paragraph 10, he starts off with a contract between PRASA and Prodigy Business Services Proprietary Limited. So that's the context against which he is laying this accusation. I'm just presenting it.
Yes, no, thanks, Mr. Soni. Chair, I just wish to emphasize, again, I deal with this issue in my own affidavit in great length, and I want to say that the contract that Mr. Dingiswa talks about, he was not actually in the employ of PRASA when this thing happened. And it's very interesting when I read all the things, you'll see that this actually contrasts so much even with what I had written on these particular issues. The people who were there, more specifically Mr. Hulele, Mr. Mpefu Ramutwa, Ms. Koko, who know the ins and outs of this particular matter, didn't file an affidavit. And somebody who joins PRASA later, just on hearsay and Versman's investigation. So it is hearsay, it's not based on direct personal knowledge, but I think he chosen to elevate it, and let's deal with the facts of the matter, Chair.
I think you're quite right. Let's deal with the facts as he presents them, and then after that, as you present them. Now I ask you then to look at paragraph 11.3 on page 99. He says in paragraph 11.3, Prodigy is a Johannesburg-based registered private company.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Soni. I'm not sure, you may have said this. Prodigy, the first entity that he wants to deal with is Prodigy Business Services Limited.
Yes.
You may have mentioned it, but
Oh,
for,
sorry,
for the
yes.
record, I just want to
Yes, no,
make sure
that-
the record reflects that this is the first one we're
This
dealing
is,
with.
this
Yeah.
is the entity.
Okay,
yes.
all right.
And he says Prodigy is a Johannesburg-based registered private company. Is that correct, Mr. Montana? At 11.3.
Well, Chair, it had a relationship with PRASA. I don't know where they are based. I assume that is correct, yeah.
All right. Then he says it entered into a number of contracts with PRASA to provide training and other related services. Is that correct?
Chair, I can confirm we had one partnership agreement with Prodigy. Of course, there were addendums over a period of time that we had indeed.
Right. And then he notes that the validity of these contracts is now in dispute.
Well, Chair, I understand the matters are between in court, and I think Prodigy is the one that took PRASA to court for not honoring its agreement and payments in that regard.
For 11.4, he says that a document that was annexed to Prodigy's payment application reflects that Prodigy reflects that Ms. Narishni Shanmugam was a director in 2006, and then in 2011, Mr. Roy Moodley was appointed a director. Are you aware of that?
Not at all, Chair. Again, in my own affidavit, Chair, I state the fact in response to what he's saying to Rule 3.3 that when we entered an agreement with Prodigy, there was not actually any Roy Moodley. I think it was in 2010. So I think he says in his affidavit that Roy Moodley became part of that company in 2012.
2011.
I think in page 5, rather page 100.
It doesn't say when, he says he resigned in 2012, Moodley. It doesn't say when.
Yeah, in 2012 he resigned, Chair, 1st of
Or
March.
he was appointed as a director 5 years after the company was registered, which would be 2011.
2011, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And resigned on 1 March 2012.
And you'll find that, Mr. Montana, at MMD 1, page 123. You don't need to look at it. It's, I'm just confirming
Thank you,
that
Chair.
it's there. Well, what we can accept now, and I take the point you make, is that Mr.
Timiswayo.
No, that Prodigy, when it first entered into the contract with PRASA, didn't have Mr. Moodley as a director. Mr. Moodley became a director in 2011 and resigned as a director in 2012. Are those the facts that we can accept?
Chair, I don't know. I don't
You
have
don't know
details,
when he became a director and when he resigned.
or even other shareholders in the business.
Yeah.
Chair. I wouldn't know that.
No, I understand. We can accept what the document says.
Says in the chair.
Yes, okay. Then at paragraph 11.6 on page 100, he says, Mr. Moodley is alleged to have benefited or alleged to be related to other entities that benefited from PRASA contracts that were concluded irregularly. Now, because that's a matter, I take it you would deny that the contracts were concluded irregularly.
Well, Chair, it's interesting. It's very interesting because if you look at the companies that are mentioned, firstly, Royal Security. The bid adjudication of PRASA that included Mr. Holele, Mrs. Ngoye, recommended for the extension of this particular contract. So somebody comes and recommends that these contracts be extended, and then come to the commission and file an affidavit that these are irregular, Chair. To take it further, Chair, in my affidavit, are part of my annexures, they actually show that the strawberry contract was signed by the CEO of Intersight at that time, and it was Mrs. Ngoye. So it's very strange, Chair, that someone sits, and you can see that at that time they didn't have a problem. Now things changes at PRASA. There's a conflict between the chair and the CEO. They start to write a whole range of things that they were actually part, they were central. I'm a CEO, I don't sit in a bid adjudication or bid evaluation. These are the people who recommend. So if somebody recommends Strawberry or recommends Royal Security or recommends Yangena, they were in the bid evaluation. In fact, Chair, I need to move beyond that and say they've got a legal responsibility. A legal responsibility when they pick up any irregularity and advise whoever is going to approve. If it's going to be approved by the CEO within the delegation of authority, they must say, we picked up these things. We think they're material or they're not material. For me to know, so that when I make a decision, after being told and those are being elevated, Chair, on all of this, on SWIFAMB, on anything, none of these bid evaluation committee members, including Mr. Holele and Mrs. Ngoye, had elevated either to me or to the board. Why do they come to the commission today to say that we think that was irregular? I was not there. They were there. They were dealing with the matters, Chair.
Well, that's very important. I assume that the homework in terms of your affidavit has started.
Chair, we were meant to meet today, but because we set up the date,
okay.
we had postponed.
Yeah.
But I think, Chair, we had committed to engage and
Yes.
resolve it as quickly as possible, Chair.
Okay, no, that's fine, because, for example, the last point that you made, you made, can be very important. So it's important to see if there is any documentation that you attach and so on in support of it.
Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Then in paragraph 11.7, we know that there is now a dispute that has been taken to court, and PRASA is challenging the validity of the contracts. I understand you say that you can't be held responsible. Other people made that.
No, not in respect of this share. I think that 11.6 is very specific allegation. 11.7, it's a completely different point. But I know the fact that PRASA has gone to court. What I've seen, though, are affidavits that were filed, where I think Prodigy was the applicant. I was not aware of the review application by PRASA itself.
Anyway, we know what courts are. Courts make their own decisions based on the information before them. We leave that. That is a matter that has not yet been determined. And then turn to paragraph 12, Mr. Montana. Says, I wish to set out in brief the manner in which the agreements, I know you say there was one agreement in respect of Prodigy and there were a number of addenda to it. Okay, but he is saying that I want to deal with how the agreement and the addenda were completed or concluded. And when I raised questions about the validity of one of the agreements, Mr. Montana dismissed me, and thereafter Ms. Ngoyi, who had questioned the fairness of my dismissal. We'll come to that in a moment, but I'm just saying that he's giving us a roadmap of where he is going to in this affidavit.
Yes, but Mr. Soni, I just want to say that that very statement, Chair, is in 12. Is false, number one. And number two, here's someone who's going to tell us about how these contracts were concluded. Yet he was not working for PRASA, Chair, when this thing was signed. So maybe Mr. Dingiswayo may want to bring somebody who told him this story that way, because now we're dealing with someone who wasn't there, who's telling us, and if he says this comes from an investigation, he must state that, not as if he was personally there, because I'm going to read out part of my affidavit on this particular issue. And you'll see that these are completely two different worlds that exist.
Okay.
Now, he also makes the point at paragraph 13 that there was an investigation conducted by Mr. Majola, and he annexes the outcome of that investigation as MMD2. And I just leave that out for a moment. I want to come back to it in a little while. I want to, though,
but can I say, without interrupting, I think that I assume the investigation referred to in 13 was done after it left PRASA.
Yes. Then he says, in regard to the various developments regarding this contract, says on the 10th of June 2010, Ms. Shanmugam sent a letter to Mr. Montana proposing some form of partnership, and he attaches the letter as MMD3, which appears at page 138. I'd like you to just go to page 138.
Chair, the letter I know very well. Actually, it's got my handwritten notes. Okay. I remember that vividly. I won't even look at it. My letter is a letter that came to me, and as a practice, you'll see, Chair, every time I give an instruction, because I knew that I'm giving lawful instruction, I always wrote on my thing. And it's very interesting, Chair, that you'll see as we proceed that presented before these commissions are people have been selective. Where I've written and they don't like it, doesn't come to the commission, it's not evidence. So these are the type of things. But I know the letter, Chair, it came, let me correct one thing on 14.1, and I think I deal with it in my affidavit, Chair. The letter was not the beginning. There were interactions between Prodigy and PRASA employees, which culminated in this letter. And then I dealt with it in a particular way. But I detail everything in my affidavit.
Hang on, Mr. Soni. We all know that Mr. Montana did prepare an affidavit that is the affidavit that is the subject of the homework I was talking about a few minutes ago. And I suspect that to help him respond to some of the allegations, that is the affidavit he keeps on looking at to see what he has got in it. Now, it may be that it would be convenient that if he responds to an allegation in a certain allegation in 14.1, he should respond to it fully, rather than saying, I deny that, on the basis that later he will give more information about it. Because if we do it that way, then in the transcript you find the whole response to a particular allegation in one place, rather than find a denial and then go somewhere else to find substantiation of that denial. What do you think of that?
I agree entirely.
Yes, yes.
The only question will be because whether one should do that in relation to what we don't want, and I understand fully why, Chairperson, is bits and pieces about the same thing in different parts of the transcript.
Yes.
Now, we either say that Mr. Montana can deal with it now, and then when his affidavit comes, it will be then simply part of the record. He won't have to deal with it again. Or we say, Mr. Montana, we reserve this issue and deal with it collectively at the time that Mr. Montana submits his affidavit. I'm just trying to find the most convenient.
What I was thinking is that the reason why his affidavit is not being used now is because the issue of annexures must be sorted out. Otherwise, if that had been sorted out, it would have been available to use. But I think there is no problem if he tells me what is in the affidavit without the affidavit being, because that's his response, you know.
Yes,
So that's what I was thinking, so that when the affidavit is filed, one reads, one sees in it what he has already told us.
Absolutely.
Yes. So, let's try that, Mr. Montana, so that your response to a prolongation are not scattered all over.
Indeed, Chair.
Yes. Okay, all right.
Chair, I was trying to hide my affidavit and saying that it's
You were
not yet
caught
been
out.
admitted, so I was referring to it, but I got caught, Chair.
You got caught. No, that's fine, but there is no problem if you tell me what's in the affidavit as your oral evidence. What is not being done is give the affidavit to me before it's completed in terms of annexures. But in terms of telling me what it is in it, it's fine. But I think you should not tell me paragraphs, for example, to say in paragraphs so in my affidavit. I think don't tell me the paragraphs. Just tell me the story. What you have to say about a particular allegation.
Thank you, Chair. I think that I address it in this.
Yeah.
This, Chair, are part of what I considered with regard to Rule 3.3 and the Regulation 10.6.
Yes.
So I've included all of those as well into my affidavit.
Okay.
Chair, I'm just addressing 4 basic things here. The first one, of course, I deal with the issue that Mr. Soni raised, the description that Mr. Deniswa raised, and I said the PRASA he describes, it didn't exist, I don't even know it, Chair. But also indicating that I expected him to be a professional, not to serve certain interests. And in this particular case, that's what he did. And his target on Mr. Moodley, actually, Chair, I deal with it at great length in terms of that. Chair, I then go to indicate again that Mr. Dingiswayo was not at PRASA when this conversation started, when the contracts were put in place. Thirdly, Chair, I then go into detail to say how the process, providing the genesis of this particular project, that in fact it goes back to 2009 when Prodigy interacted with PRASA officials, including Mr. Mpefuram Mutwa. And Chair, what it proposed in essence was that it proposed a partnership because it was awarded what we call learnerships from the services SETA. And it says, look, we've got learnerships for about 300 people. We can give that to PRASA so that then we explore that in terms of on the people who service, on the services side or customer services side of the business. We train them. And this was a very unique proposal that they presented to us, Chair. And we're happy we accepted, and that is why the letter that Mr. Soni referred. So it was then elevated to me. Then I said, no, that actually is a great thing. Let's interact with them, Chair. And the partnership was developed, prepared by our legal department, Chair. At that time, of course, it was Mr. Lindikaya Zide. Mr. Dingiswayo was not yet at PRASA, Chair. And it was developed, signed, and the training took place, Chair.
Was Ms. Ngoye there at that time?
Ms. Ngoye was not at PRASA, he was in our 2009-2010, no, she wasn't there, Chair, either.
Okay.
She wasn't even there at all. She was not, because I think she joined, if I remember, I recall, Chair, she joined PRASA only in 2011, and she joined not as a CEO or as an executive. She actually was, she left from Transnet in the legal department to join our property arm and being the head of the office of the CEO at Intersite. And Chair, when the CEO left, because she was doing a lot of the work, she showed interest in the work, and I'm the one, Chair, who recommended that she be appointed as the executive chair. So the people who say today I'm a dictator, you can't stand on my path, are the people, all of them, Chair, were appointed by me. Even Mr. Dingiswayo, when her first boss, who joined us from, I think, Standard Bank, recommended that he's keen, he'll have interviews, but he thinks he's got his man. I said, well, it's your team. Build it as long as you bring professionals that are there. Mr. Hulele, Chair, you know, when we appointed, I know Mr. Hulele for a very long time. When we appointed him as an executive, I had a big fight with the board, with the HR and Remuneration Committee of the board. They said, he's still a young man, he's not yet experienced and everything. I said, this man has got a sharp mind. I think that he's one for the future. Let's invest in him. The board rejected my arguments. They actually said, no, get an experienced old white man to guide you and assist you instead of taking this young man. The board then instructed the HR committee of the board and me to say, you guys go and meet and try to find consensus on the issue. We met at the Tinswalo Hotel, and the HR committee was squeezing me, Chair, to say, motivate, tell us. And I said, look, you want me to bring an old white man to be my advisor. For me, tomorrow when I leave PRASA, I need to ensure that we build a cadre of young, competent black professionals who can continue running this entity. And ultimately the board agreed. Now when I disciplined Mr. Hulele, Chair, and that is why he's taking strong action, he worked with me. When the unions accused me of corruption, the person who penned an article in the Mail and Guardian defending me was Mr. Hulele. But later I had to discipline him, and he changed, and I became the monster that I describe in these pages, Chair. So I think that as long as we're guided by the facts, they've got the right to have an opinion, Chair, and I've got my own views about these people. But all the people who stabbed me at the back are people that I tried to build. I appointed when Ms. Ngoye was meant to leave Intersite, Chair. And I think in a replying affidavit, she described and talked about bonuses. The board of Intersight, of which I was the chair, had said, look, we are not getting the results from it. Let's follow a proper process and make sure that we replace her. I had a one-on-one meeting with her. I said, look, my dear sister, I'm not saying you're not a CEO, but it's quite clear you're not ready. Now, the board wants us to take this, and I objected. I'd recommended that instead of you can prepare yourself. We are consolidating and restructuring our legal and compliance function. And I think that I've requested that, I've advised that you assume that position as a group executive. If you become CEO of PRASA tomorrow, any of its divisions or subsidiaries, that's fine. She cried. She cried. She cried. And when I left and I went on leave, to show my confidence, as part, because we're using whenever I leave, would then select an executive to act. So this one-man show, that PRASA was a one-man show, like Imontana
I think you didn't finish the point you wanted to make. I think you had started making it. I think you wanted to say, when you went on leave, you recommended that she be acting group CEO.
Indeed, Chair. After taking her from Intersight and to assume the group position that she was, group legal risk and compliance, I recommended that she act. Because every time I travel, I would then pick up any of the executive. Of course, that I do in consultation with the chair of the board, and depending on the duration, I'll say, so-and-so will act in the position. Martha acted in the position, Chair. But I didn't realize how bitter she was, that she was no longer CEO of Intersight. So when I allowed her to act into that position, in December 2014, that's when, Chair, they went on the offensive with Mr. Molefe to investigate me, to try and find all sorts of things that were there. But again, all of them, Chair, I want to do here at the commission. I prove each of these to be false, unfounded, Chair. I've got my own weaknesses as a human being. But the ones that I'm accused of in these pages, Chair, are totally false, Chair. All of us are human beings, we've got our own faults, I've got mine. But the ones that I mentioned here, Chair, are part of an agenda to try to discredit me, and at the heart of it were people who met with Mr. Molefe behind my back to try and build a case. And I'll demonstrate that in the course of the conversation, Chair.
Okay, all right.
Chair, finally, because you interrupted, the final point, Chair, value for money. I was part with Minister Bundebele, with the trade unions, when the first group of people who were trained were being recognized, because this recognition is big for employees who don't have matric, who don't have qualification. This was a major thing.
That is the training.
The training that was done by Prodigy. And because it was accredited widely, Chair, and employees, particularly our customer services staff, they love this, Chair. Lastly, on this issue, Chair, we even received an international award. I wanted to bring it and lift it here, Chair, which our customer services executive in our rail division went to receive overseas, which was for innovation, for excellence, Chair. Today, as I come here, Chair, employees, the trade union called me to say, our people have been trained. They haven't been given their own certificates. They want those certificates because for them, if they were to be retrenched today, they'll be able to go to any customer services business and use this. So, yes, you may pick up irregularities, Chair. I don't have a problem when somebody picks up an irregularity and say, maybe here we didn't. By the way, Mr. Dingisoayo, in his affidavit, or rather in a letter that you'll see I attached to my affidavit, he says some of the executives who were dealing with this issue of Prodigy actually misled Mr. Montana. He says that in black and white. Okay? Yet he forgot his own letter, Chair. And now this thing is about Montana. It's no longer about those officials. So he was in there. He writes something, he changes, because at the heart of it is that, no, we must show. Chair, after I dealt with the Gupta's attempts at PRASA, now people say, no, there must be another Gupta. And this Gupta, that is why you see Mr. Molefe, Mr. Dingisoayo, Mrs. Ngoye, they write about Roy Moodley, because He's supposed to be the Gupta at PRASA, that like he dealt with his Guptas, there's another Gupta. And you must also understand the racist undertone of that chair. I'm an independent person. And I think, I know that I may be taking a bit long, let me cut it, but chair, I fought with a lot of people, ministers, and if something I believe is wrong, I say it's wrong. But if I believe that is a strategy, I always said in my executive committee meetings, we're going to do 1, 2, 3 after we've debated. And I've never been afraid, Chair, because I've never made unlawful decisions and all of those things. But there's an attempt to take whatever may have been a mistake or a shortcoming or an irregularity to elevate it so that it becomes criminality, so that those of us who don't follow a particular narrative are pursued and chased, Chair. And unfortunately, not with the business of PRASA, because I happen to have the facts and I'm here to assist the Commission to understand both sides of that narrative, Chair.
Okay, no, thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Montana, you saw me smile, and the reason I smile is somebody cynically said to me that the Guptas were from India. Roy Moodley was the Gupta from KZN.
Indeed, Chair.
But that's
Exactly. So
that's what somebody cynically said to me. That's the reason I smile. I don't.
But yes, I think that's a good one, Chair. But I was chased. You see, the problem at PRASA, Chair, is because people thought at the beginning, they thought the Guptas are so much at PRASA. When they realized the Guptas are not at PRASA because we said no, then they had to find something else. They didn't stop and say the Guptas are not there. They actually thought the Guptas were involved with President Zuma in the PRASA rolling stock program. Chair, the reality is that there was no President Zuma, there were no Guptas lurking at PRASA. I stood my ground, and all the record, Chair, even when we discussed in Parliament, in the parliamentary inquiry into governance at ESCOM, I dealt with the Guptas story. Minister Ben Martins came to confirm all of that. So there were no Guptas, but people thought we are captured by the Guptas. They are not my friends, Chair. I mean, even I've never, people tell me they went to the Gupta compound to eat what, carry and other things. You were told, Chair. Chair, where I used to stay, I was in the same street as the Duduzane Zuma, and the Guptas were in a corner. They've never been to my house. I've never been to their house. And I've never asked for any favors from them, Chair, in my entire life. And this has to do with my own upbringing, Chair. My parents will frown upon me, going after people to ask for favors instead of doing things in a proper way. So I'm not saying, the Commission can point out and say, Chair, you may ask me, say, Mr. Montana, with hindsight, do you think that decision was a mistake? Chair, I'll be here, I'll tell you to say, Chair, after I thought about it and seen the full picture, I think it was an error of judgment on my side. So I'm here to take accountability, not to pass accountability, but at the same time, the lies that have been printed in the country that do not have basis whatsoever, Chair, I think I'm going to challenge them and take them head on. Chair.
Yeah, no, I'm happy, Mr. Montana, that you are using the Commission to deal with whatever allegations have been made against you and to place before the Commission all the facts as you know them that you believe the Commission should know. Because that's what we want. That's what we want. We are not here to want one side because we want a particular outcome. I mean, sometimes I don't understand some things that one reads in newspapers about me and about the Commission. If I want to make a finding against you, Mr. Montana, what a bad person you are, the best way for me to do that is not to have you here giving me contrary evidence, giving me examples of what a good person you are. The best thing is for me to grab the first opportunity when you indicate you don't want to come and say, okay, you don't come. Because if I do it that way, the only evidence I will have is the evidence against you. When I want you to come and tell your story, it doesn't make sense to say, I want to find against you. What if you give me compelling evidence that the people who are saying all kinds of things against you are lying about you?
But Chair, on a lighter note, I would ask and urge that you do make a finding that Mr. Montana is such a good man. I think such a finding in the final report, Chair, would help the country to move forward, Chair.
Well, all I can tell you, Mr. Montana, is that whatever findings I will make about anybody are not going to be dictated by whatever the public says, by whatever happens outside of the hearing. It's going to be based, those findings will be based on the evidence that I have had, you know. And I'll be looking at all evidence that has been placed before me. So you are doing the right thing by coming to the commission, putting your side of the story so that, one, the public knows your side of the story, two, the commission has your evidence. Whatever the commission might find in the end, you must be able to say, but they did have my evidence.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Mr. Sona?
As you please. So, Mr. Montana, coming back to 14.1, we know that Ms. Shanmugam sent you the letter on the 10th of June, and you wrote a note on the letter. I just want to read, if you don't mind, for the record, what is contained in part of the letter and in part of your response.
We are in MM3.
We are at page 138, Mr. Montana, the black 138.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the page, Mr.
138.
138.
Chairperson, sorry. So, Ms. Shanmugam says, and the letter is addressed to PRASA for your attention, and it says, in respect of piloting of Center for Excellence model and learnership implementation. It says, further to discussions held from March 2010 with respect to the Center of Excellence model, Prodigy hereby confirms that it is able to provide PRASA with 300 funded learnerships that will fast-track the piloting of the Center for Excellence model. That's what that letter
correct,
says.
Chair.
Right? And he says in the second paragraph, Prodigy has been awarded bursary funding for 300 learnerships from the services CETA via the discretionary grant process. And then in the in the third sentence, he says the 300 learnerships will be learnerships that reside with services CETA and for which Prodigy has accreditation. A list of applicable qualifications accompanies this letter. Then she says the value to PRASA, this is in the last paragraph, of the 300 funded learnerships is of the order of 28,800,000 Rand in training grants and tax allowances. PRASA will be able to claim the full 60,000 Rand and tax allowance per learner, totaling 18 million Rand for the 300 learners. So that's how she is presenting this to you, and then you inscribe on that. And as I said, if you want to read any further part, I just wanted the gist of that. And you inscribe on that to Mr. Kolele and Mr. Impefu, the proposal from Prodigy is accepted we should enter into a partnership with Prodigy Business Proprietary Limited. We need a formal MOU in this to this effect. Prepare.
Kindly prepare
Oh,
a letter for my signature acknowledging receipt and confirming our acceptance of the proposal from Prodigy.
And you signed that on the 10th of June,
Indeed, Chair.
the same day that the letter
was
is sent.
Indeed, Chair.
Let's confirm that is 10 June 2010.
2010, as you
2010,
Yeah.
said.
I confirm, Chair, that
Yes.
this is the letter and those were the notes written by me, Chair.
Yes. Can I just ask you, Mr. Muntra, to explain this proposal to me? I'm not sure that I asked any of the witnesses that gave evidence previously. Is the position that Prodigy approached the services sitter and was granted money?
Chair, you are not granted actual money.
Yes, but
Yeah.
you are told we are prepared to spend so much, but we keep the money, but you will provide invoices or whatever.
Exactly.
So granted money in that sense,
Indeed,
you
Chair.
don't get the cash, but the effect of the decision of the sitter is you can go and train people in terms of learnership to the value of this amount.
That amount.
And you will be training them for them to get the following kind of training or qualification. And you will be paid by the sitter.
Chair, what will happen is that then once the training has happened,
Yeah.
then you are able to claim that money
Yes.
from that particular sitter,
Which they would have put aside for you.
which they would have put aside. So they'll come and say, we've entered into, let's say, a partnership,
Yeah.
whether with the SAPS or with PRASA.
Yeah.
We are doing this training. Once it's certified and all of those things, and PRASA, even if it were to pay, Chair, is able to recover that money from that claiming process, as it were. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, but in terms of this proposal, PRASA would not pay for the training.
No, Chair, it will still pay, because
Yeah.
you remember when you enter into a partnership,
Yeah.
you may, because you remember when we said we use the 300 to pilot what you call a center for excellence. And the Center for Excellence was here. We built it just behind Park Station here. So then it provides training beyond that. So there would be costs that PRASA would carry as well in the process. And if we increase, and if you look at the addendum, for example, the addendums will say, we think this is benefiting the company, then let's add additional numbers. Then those will not come from the sitter, will then come directly from us, Chair. So we'll incur costs as well as PRASA.
But the money that the sitter would have put aside in this case would be for the actual training.
Indeed, Chair.
Yeah. Now, as far as the people who would be trained are concerned, would the cost that PRASA would incur relate to the actual training or to something incidental like paying for the venue or something like that?
No, even both, Chair. If you look at it, for example, what happened, there was a big fight on this issue. After I've signed, there was an agreement, and then the initial 300 flew, I think that it flowed quite nicely. When the addendum was signed for the next group, and I think the numbers will then increase in that respect, there was quite a lot of disagreement between PRASA managers and Prodigy in respect of that particular contract. In the first phase, Chair, what happened is that Prodigy then carried a lot of the cost. Because we said, well, the seat had given it to you, You carry the cost and you claim back from them. I don't know about the exact amount as it were, Chair, right now, but they then carry the cost. But the later costs for additional numbers were paid for by PRASA in line with addendums. I think there were 2 addendums that were signed by, I think one by 2 of our general managers, Chair.
So the terms and conditions under which the SETA would set aside X amount for Prodigy to do this training, would it be on the basis that if the SETA says 100 rand per learner, for example, they are free, if they agree with PRASA, to charge whatever, to charge more per learner, and then PRASA tops up, or they can only charge what the SETA had, what they had agreed with the SETA. I'm just trying to see how come PRASA would still pay for the training. I can understand if it's other expenses. How come PRASA would still pay for the actual training if the SETA is given as is going to pay them for the training, Prodigy?
Chair, I think we decided to use the program to train our entire customer services teams
Oh,
throughout the country.
To widen the scope.
To widen the scope,
Yes,
because we said,
yes.
look, why in an organization of 16 people,
Yeah.
the majority are working at stations?
Yeah.
Why do you deal with only 300 people?
Yes.
And this has been well received by employees who are trained, who have received the certificate.
Yes.
So we think that is something we should go on with the program. From that point,
Yes.
that was not part of the original letter
Yes.
that was presented to us, Chair.
Yeah.
So that PRASA will carry for the
Yes.
training, Chair.
Which I guess means that insofar as the first 300 are concerned,
Indeed, Chair.
PRASA would not have paid anything in regard to the actual training.
No, Chair, no. That's
But
correct.
insofar as you widened the scope,
That's correct, Chair.
then you would pay because that's not covered by the SETA.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, now I understand. Okay, Mr. Soni.
As you please, Chair. Now, I just want to ask, if you look at the figures on page 138, the amount per learner would be 6,000 Rand. Would that be correct, Montana?
You are in page 1.
Page 138. We're still at the Prodigy letter.
Yeah.
Because it's 18 million Rand for 300 learners. That would be 6,000 Rand per learner. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
I think on average, yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Now, then...
And, I'm sorry, and 300 funded learnerships basically amounts to saying 300 learners.
Learners, indeed, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
Now, in this case, was it a situation where PRASA paid Prodigy and then claimed from SETA, because that's what the letter seemed to say, or was it that Prodigy claimed from SETA? I'm just trying to, because that's what the letter seemed to say. Do you know or don't you?
No, Chair, but what I know is that PRASA itself would claim from, because there's a skills levy, Chair, to recall. And I think in terms of our target at that time, for the number of people we train, I think it should be per annum 2% of the workforce for all the training that are subjected to, whether from the transport SETA or from any other SETA. If we've done the training, we had the right, Chair, to do that. And even from a tax perspective, Chair, we could do that. Of course, PRASA was not a tax-paying entity. It is still not, as far as I know, but 2 of its subsidiaries, Autopex and Intersite, they can put that on they can claim that from a tax point of view. The initial cost, Chair, when we were waiting and there was still a lot of bickering, I know that the Prodigy did want to claim from us that it has carried certain costs at the beginning, but we said, but those you can claim directly from the SETA. But that was the briefing that I would get from the team, Chair, as the project was being implemented over a period of time.
For PRASA, obviously the advantage was that it was getting skills training for its employees. For Prodigy, it was the fact that it was getting work to the tune of 18 million rand.
Chair, I think if you look at it for Prodigy, it offered that to us. I think that one of the things you see in the Dissecting affidavit was that this thing was supposed to go out on tender. But a partnership means somebody's bringing something to the table, and you agree on the value there. And if we agree to pilot the Center of Excellence through using that learnership program, Chair, it's quite clear that the Prodigy will get extra work as a result beyond the 300 that is there. So it goes. That is a business decision that you have to make, as it were, and I supported it on that basis.
Do you know whether, I'm sorry, Mr. Sorry. Or let me first ask this question. I take it that in terms of how the SETAs operate, an employer such as PRASA is entitled to approach the relevant SETA and say, I would like to have my staff trained. Can you make money available? And then they can set aside some money with or without conditions. Do you know whether that is true? That's correct?
So what happens is that there may be programs, for example, that the SETA may initiate, or PRASA may initiate in the fund, but most of the training, Chair, we must budget for it. We budget for training as PRASA, we spend the money, and then there's a process where we then apply to get part of the money we spend. I think there's a formula they use.
Okay.
So you train people, and then they give you the money based on that, Chair.
Okay. So normally as an employer, you just go ahead and train people.
We train people.
And then afterwards go to the SETA and say, this is the training that I've provided to my staff. Here is proof. These are the expenses I've incurred to carry out that training.
Indeed, Chair.
And then in that case, well, I guess when you say there's a formula they apply, what from that means is that you don't get everything back in terms of your costs.
No, Chair. That is why even in the letter there, that you are able to get part of that allowance.
Yes.
And it depends also on the nature of the training. I mean, it's an
Yes.
accredited program
Yeah.
that, let's say, a transport SETA is approved. They may give you the full amount for that, Chair. And that is why it is aimed at incentivizing both public and private companies
Yes.
to invest in skills in the
Yeah,
country, Chair.
okay. Thank you. Mr. Sonnen?
As you please, Chair. Then he says, a partnership agreement between Prodigy and PRASA was signed on the 11th of October 2010, and he annexes that as MMD4. You confirm that?
Sorry, Mr. You left me behind. I'm still
sorry.
with the letter. Left you behind,
Oh,
Chair.
sorry.
I don't know where you've gone.
You say, because I think he has gone to the affidavit, back to the affidavit.
Oh, sorry.
I beg at page 101.
We are back at page 101, yes. Sorry.
Okay.
So, if I could just go back so that we're all on the same lines, as it were. We started off on the 10th of June, the letter was sent, then you made the inscription on the letter. Those are the first three sentences of paragraph 14.1, Mr. Montana. Then he says a partnership agreement between Prodigy and PRASA was signed on the 11th of October, and he annexes the agreement. You confirm that that is, in fact, the agreement that
That's
was
correct. That's
concluded.
correct, Chair.
And he makes the point that, or in the agreement, it is noted that you signed on behalf of PRASA.
The partnership agreement, Chair,
Yes.
I signed, yes.
Then he says, thereafter, on the 30th of August 2011, an addendum was concluded with Mr. Impefo now signing on behalf of PRASA. And that is annexes MMD 5. You confirm that? Sorry.
Yeah, confirm that, Chair, that's correct.
Then on the 31st of October 2012, a further aspect was added to the agreement, and again, he says you signed that part. And that appears at page 179.
179.
Yes. Sorry. At page 177. That is your signature there.
Indeed, Chair.
Yes. Okay. Anyway,
I'm sorry, his signature is at what page?
at page 177, Chair.
Okay.
Now, he says as far as this part is concerned, you could go to page 174, Mr. Montana. You'll see that this tells you what the cost is. And right at the bottom of page 174, this says the cost per learner is 24,000 Rand, and the cost of 3,000 learners is 72 million Rand.
I'm trying to, you're in page 174,
174, right at the bottom.
right at the bottom, okay?
Yes.
Indeed, Chair.
That's the agreement that we've been looking at,
Okay.
that was signed by you.
Exactly, Chair.
Right. Now, I just have in relation to, remember I asked you in regard to the 300 learners, we agreed that the cost was 6,000 Rand per learner.
Indeed, Chair.
Now, two things happen here, and I'm giving you the opportunity to explain. One is the number of learners increases from 300 to 3,000. That's correct, isn't it? But now, just in relation to that, as I understood your evidence earlier, PRASA would be able to claim from CETA for the 300 learners. Would it be able to claim in respect of these 3,000 learners as well?
All the training, Chair, PRASA would be able to claim for all the monies that were. You remember this is now moving beyond the 300, Chair, that we spoke
Yes.
about earlier, yeah.
So although the numbers increase, it would still be CETA that pays.
No, Chair. It would not be CETA, it would be PRASA that pays and will claim the money from the skills levy, as it were.
But what amount will it claim?
I'm sorry. So the regime, as I understand it, which I think you explained to me, is in respect of the 300 learners that Prodigy and the CETA agreed upon. Prodigy would not claim anything from PRASA in respect of the actual training, but they would claim from the sitter because that's the arrangement.
Honourable Chair, PRASA will still claim. Even
Sorry?
if PRASA will still claim for anything. Any training that we do,
Yeah.
PRASA will claim the money for that training.
No. Let's take it step by step. I'm saying, based on what I understood you to say to me earlier on, as far as the first 300 learners are concerned, I think you did indicate that for the actual training, Prodigy would be paid by the sitter.
No, Chair.
Uh,
What has happened here is that, let me explain, Chair. Once they give you they say we are giving you the learnership. It means that money, Chair, that has been allocated for training is given to you.
that is Prodigy or PRASA?
Or PRASA, which
Yeah.
is PRASA.
Yes.
But let's say they've got their own list,
Yes.
a database of their suppliers who present different training programs. They'll approve some and not approve some. And these service providers will decide, Chair. If you look in my, for example, affidavit, we deal with some of the training that Prodigy was doing for other agencies of the state. So but they went to the CETA, get that learnerships, and they award and they allocate them. Now, the training will happen, Chair. Now, in this particular instance, I said, the point I made was that Prodigy then, because of what was happening, it carried the cost, the initial cost of the training program. And when they wanted to claim from us, we said, no, but we haven't yet come to that point. You can carry the cost until such time that we're able to, because you recall, Chair, this is in the middle of a financial year. Not all the costs, we had to shift costs for training from other training to allocate to this particular training. So, Chair, each and every training we do, even if we end up, we pay someone, it means therefore that we can claim that money from the CETA.
Yes, I understand that part. I'm still looking at what it means for Prodigy and the CETA that this training has come about, not because PRASA approached the CETA or PRASA decided to do the training itself and then claim, but that it came about because of the arrangement between Prodigy and the CETA. Yeah. So my earlier understanding of what you had said was that as far as the fees for Prodigy, if you can call them that, for the actual training, PRASA is not liable. The CETA is liable because of the arrangement Prodigy made with the CETA. But even in regard to that, those 300, PRASA can put in its own claim. We didn't go into the details. There would be something that it can get. But when it came to the additional learners outside of the 300, I understood that PRASA would pay, would conduct the training or get whoever to conduct it for them, and then spend the money, but claim from the CETA. But I think, based on what you have just said, that understanding of mine might not be accurate.
No, Chair, in both instances, PRASA would spend the money,
Yes.
knowing that there's an agreement.
Yeah.
That letter, that training has been ceded to it by
Yeah.
Prodigy in this
Yeah.
instance.
Yeah.
And that it goes on with the training knowing that there is 18 million in the kitty
Yeah.
that it can claim back to come back to PRASA.
So the process of Prodigy getting paid, how does it happen? What is the route?
So you'll see that in the first part, but with the annexures, with the addendum rather, it's a completely different thing because we are dealing with, and let me say, the 6,000 per learner.
Yeah.
You remember that it's a specific approved program.
Yeah.
Now, what has happened with the Center of Excellence, PRASA and Prodigy then engage and agreed on the nature of the program that needs to be done. Okay, so that goes far beyond what, for example, was initially provided in the CETA award. Secondly, Chair, PRASA didn't only train, it used that training to train also people outside of its own ranks. For example, we're working with a number of community organizations. So we'll say nominate people and bring them, let's also train them into parts. So the numbers will go and they'll get certification as well.
So when all is said and done, is the position that whether an employer conducts the training of its staff itself without a third party, or it brings in a third party, ultimately, the cost of the training, the bill gets footed by the CETA minus whatever the employer will claim from the CETA.
Indeed, Chair, but they'll have to verify whether the training did indeed take
Yes,
place.
yes.
It was it's in line with whatever
Yes,
is provided
yes.
there. Chair, but ultimately,
It's the CETA that.
there are two types of things, Chair, that perhaps I should explain. There will be something like this where these guys will come and say, we've got learnerships from
Yeah.
CETA X.
Yes.
We've got this amount of money. Can we use it at PRASA?
Yes.
And then there is the ongoing targets that we have in terms of training. Now, this is not a training, so over and above what Prodigy had proposed, PRASA had its own target in terms of training people, which it also claimed from the transport
CETA.
CETA as an example.
Yes. Okay. No, thank you, Mr. Sonu.
Now, in regard to the contract we are talking about, the one at page 174, well, I mean, where the figures are at 174, the figure for per learner is 24,000 rand. The original, the figure originally agreed with Prodigy was 6,000 rand per learner. That I can understand CETA would pay. Would CETA still pay 4 times that amount for each learner if you claim that from CETA?
No, Chair. The CETA will still claim the money. But remember, the 18 million is linked to 300 learners. The specific basic training, that is for a basic training that is there. We took a decision that, okay, we developed what we call My Station program, which was a program to prepare our people who said, we are modernizing PRASA, we need to have new employees, it can't be only about new trains. Even the people at stations and all the things, there must be people who can respond to the challenges of the time. So we designed a completely new program where employees will come from all over the country and trained. So what happens is that the 3,000 and the 300 is not one and the same thing, Chair. And now I realize that perhaps what we should have done, with hindsight, we shouldn't have called that an addendum. It should have been dealt with basically as to say, let's build on the center, but we enter a completely different agreement, because I understand, Mr. Soni, when you asked that question, is that you initiated a program based on the 300, and then you build on it, the numbers keep on increasing, the value keeps on going up, but the amount, all of it, we are allowed to claim back from the CETA, Chair.
Well, this is what intrigues me. If I were the head of CETA, whichever CETA it is, I am told in the original agreement in 2010 that it costs 6,000 rand that they will claim for each person trained. And then in 2012, they will claim 24,000 rand for each person claimed. Why should I, as the head of CETA, pay 24,000 rand when 2 years ago a CETA was paying 6,000?
Indeed, I think that, Chair, if it is the same program, it is the same basic training, and that has been increased in that way, Yes, I think as the head of the CETA, I would be intrigued. But if it's a completely different program where we say, look, we are building on that, we are opening this center, we are providing, one of the things that we did, for example, in our center chair was to, in respect of the training for train drivers, we brought in one of the sophisticated machines where our drivers were trained, I think the word will come back now in my head, where similar to what you do when you train pilots or whatever, Chair, you create an environment where if drivers are driving a train and there's a lot of rain or whatever, so some of it highly advanced training programs that comes into our Center for Excellence. So it was no longer the same training program. We built onto that. It was a much more sophisticated, detailed program that is there. I think the word will come back, Chair, so that when you create a, what is the word? It disappeared again from me. So pilots, for example, Chair, when they are trained, there's an artificial situation created as part of that training. We did the same, for example, with the Center of Excellence. It's not far. I visited it quite a number of times. I've addressed the employees who were attending that particular program, and the others took place around the country, as it were. So, Mr. Soni is correct, Chair, but if it is the same term, same training, yes, it shouldn't be. But if it's a different training, and we use that program to expand and bring as many people as possible and get advanced training, that's what we chose to do, Chair, and that was the innovation and the award that we got for the program.
Who determined the amount of 24,000 Rand for each trainer?
So this was negotiated between Prodigy and our HR department, but because the numbers and the amounts were huge, it required the approval of the CEO. And that is why, Chair, you see that when you see what you referred to me, Mr. Soni, the page 174, my signature. After the 174, I think, Chair, where I confirm, no, 177, sorry.
177.
177, it's my signature there.
Yes.
As you can see, Chair, that there are PRASA people who signed, but because the numbers are not the same as the numbers that were part of that initial scheme, it then required the approval of the group CEO, Chair, and I've accordingly approved that because it was within my delegation of authority.
You say I see that there are sub PRASA people who signed that, but I only see your signature. Only your signature at 177.
Yes,
Or
Chair,
did
but
you
I
talk
think
talk about another page.
Yeah, Chair, but I can see that on page, for example, 176. So this was a memo. Let's check in the front page, Chair, who would have. Okay, this is the actual agreement, but there will be a memo accompanying this agreement, explaining to me.
Yeah.
So, but because it has budgetary impact,
Yeah.
beyond what was initially agreed, the team would motivate for me to sign. And Chair, that's why I accordingly approved.
Okay. So you say there would have been a memo that accompanied the draft agreement.
The draft agreement, Chair.
Yeah.
The draft, Chair, there are two main players here. Our HR department is the one that deals with the training issue. I'm speaking as if, Chair, I'm still at PRASA. At that time, Chair, they will deal with the actual business of the training, including the claiming from the skill. That is an ongoing part of their functions. The drafting of this and the vetting of the agreement will then be done by our legal department, which then both of them will be submitted to me, motivating. If I'm unhappy, of course, I will not approve. But if I'm happy and believe that there's value for money, then I'll approve. Like in this instance, Chair, I did approve.
Well, I think what I would like you to deal with, the 300 learners, the first lot, what skills were they being trained on? Or I want to compare that. You later on tell me about the 3,000. Because you have said that it's different programs, that's fine, but I want to know what were the actual skills were they being trained on, or qualifications or whatever. I just want to get that, like this one was, they were being trained to drive cars, or they're being trained. When you are being trained to drive a car, it costs 6,000. But when you are being trained to drive a train, that's 24,000. That's different. That's what I'm looking at.
Yeah. I was giving that as an example, Chair, for some of the trainings.
Yes, I accept that.
Chair, the training for the initial group was what we call a basic training in customer service, for people to understand the importance of customer services in the business and all of those things. It doesn't take you to the level where you acquire skills that could even take you higher in the organization.
So I guess when customer service would be like, how important it is to smile when you serve a customer,
Well, Chair,
or to follow up if there are complaints and so on.
Chair, during the 2006 World Cup, you remember the Germans were trained how to smile because they were regarded as people who were very serious and were going to their country for the 2006 World Cup. So, Chair, it will be basic about how to treat your customers.
Don't speak on the phone while you're talking to a customer. that kind of thing.
But this was basic part of the initial leadership that were there.
Yeah.
So it was basic training that were there. But the awards that we did, Chair, were still accredited though.
For the basic.
For
the 3,000.
For the 300.
For the 300.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's like someone you send in for a basic training course, they get their acknowledgement of it. And the second part, Chair, was a much more detailed one because it also teaches you about your business, the management of processes, and on all of those processes. So the entire value chain about customer services and some of the technical skills that you require, Chair.
The people who would be eligible to get onto the program involving 3,000 compared to the categories of people who got onto the basic program. Were there categories to say, for example, for the basic one, we need people who fall within the following categories or who have got these qualifications, maybe metric, but maybe once you get to the second one, which is more expensive, we are looking at maybe some managers and so on. Was there anything like that?
Yes, sir. For example, access controllers, the people that you find when you come into a station, the people who check your tickets. The first program was targeted at those kind of people.
Yes.
When you look at the second part of the program, some of them targeted management. Oh, by the way, access controllers, but also the unemployed people, Chair, they got onto that program. People who are unemployed, organizations like South African commuter organizations will nominate people, let's say from Orange Farm and everything, and say, we think that we work with commuters. We want this kind of basic skills, and our people get certificates. So that will do, Chair. But when you look at the one that was costing on average 20 pro, you are even targeting higher people, including those at the entry to management level, Chair, that were being trained. So that is why the cost wouldn't have been the same. It wouldn't have been the same level. Even the intensity, Chair, because a 2-week basic program will not be similar. It will not be the same where a program you run over a period of 6 months. But again, it's dependent on releasing of people. Because one of the major things is that if you do it in modules, because there are modules in these programs, you find that one of the major things I remember was a big problem in this program between our HR team and our customer services thing was, and with Prodigy, was the fact that PRASA signed an agreement, but it doesn't release the people that have been identified to require this kind of program. So they'll say, we, for example, have booked a place. We also secured facilitators who pitch up, and sometimes there's half of the people that we require there. And we have to do the program twice or thrice because the same number of people, instead of coming to one session, they come to 2 or 3 different sessions that are there. So, Chair, they were not the same program. So the first one targeted access controllers, Chair, mainly within the metro rail environment. When I went to the Eastern Cape, Chair, for a roadshow with employees, I remember employees there said, why we are part of Shosholoza Mail, the intercity long distance. Why aren't we also being given the same kind of training? And I remember that as a result of that, the head of Shosholoza Mail operations, not the CEO, but the guy who was running operations, I think Mr. Nelson Pailani, then wrote a letter requesting that, no, we've got our own people who should be nominated and participate in the program as it were. So, Chair, I think there were a lot of ups and downs in the program, but was it a great program for PRASA? I think as CEO, I would say it was one of the best programs that were ever implemented, and that is why when, in fact, I was requested to travel to Vienna at the time, Chair, but I couldn't travel, and one of our main executives traveled there to receive the award, because the impact of that program on making sure that you don't only modernize, because the key thing, Chair, is modernization, that you are modernizing your operations, but the employees are not prepared. So you needed to create a new person, a new employee, to be able to match all of that. So the Center of Excellence, my station program, and the Center of Excellence was aimed at achieving that, Chair. I don't know today as to whether PRASA is getting the benefit of those training, except that I did get a call from one of the unions saying, you've trained our people, they didn't get their own certificates. What is happening? Can this service provider provide and deliver that to us? But I said, well, that's a matter between PRASA and Prodigy to resolve, particularly with the disputes and the court processes that are underway. Chair, there was value for money. I was satisfied it was a good program for us.
Yeah, did you say, or was it just an example, that the duration of the first program, that's the program involving 300, was 2 weeks, and this one for the 3,000 was 6 months? Or were those just examples?
No, I was giving examples, Chair, that you have modules that run over, for example, over a 2-week program, for example, or 6, and you wouldn't manage them the same, Chair. But the first was for access controllers, basic training, and the other one, Chair, moved to even the management echelons, entry-level management echelons in our services, in our customer services part of the business.
Do you recall the duration in regard to both, or you don't remember?
No, Chair, not offhand, but I know that when I visited, I was still given the files for training, and I still have them, Chair.
Yes.
And maybe it's something that I should share with the Commission to be able to evaluate this program, Chair.
Yeah, okay, all right. Mr. Soni.
Chairperson, I just want to clear 3 or 4 things. I know it is tea time, but I thought I'd just clear them. Mr. Dingizwayo says that in regard to this program at page 174, the duration of the training was 5 days. Do you agree?
Are you in page 175?
174.
174.
The same one we were dealing with, yes. It's cost per learner, 24,000, and cost of 3,000. You want to come back to that issue after tea?
No, I'm trying to see where in his affidavit is he saying, I'm trying to...
I see. He says that if you look at the second last line on page 101, he says, in effect, this part of the contract required PRASA to pay 24,000 Rand per learner for a 5-day course.
No, Chair, that can't be correct. And I think Mr. Dingiswayo is really trying to find fault with the program. When we go into my affidavit, Chair, one of the things that I didn't share, for example, you'd see that even there's been quite a lot of engagement. Some of the PRASA HR people who wanted, for example, this program to be linked with some of the more advanced programs that were there. And I think I detailed some of those. So the program chair was far bigger than that, chair. And I'm trying to find the specific part, chair, in my affidavit. For example, one of the things is that our HR department, something that I intervened and fight about, wanted Prodigy to enter into a joint venture with another company called Talent Institute, which was already doing work for PRASA, and say, let's consolidate these particular programs. And that is why I'm saying, Chair, if you apply the same principle, Mr. Dingiswa will say, for example, we think, let's say Talent Institute, which has been with PRASA, doing work for PRASA for many years, which I actually questioned and say, hey, are these people the only guys who are training in this environment? So they were part because, businesses, the way they run, Chair, people create their own spaces, their own fiefdom, because they get comfortable working with other people, and they want to create all of that spaces. But Chair, the program was far bigger, and that is why I'll share the material so that the commission will be able to see that. I think that what Mr. Dingiswa is trying to get to is to try to reduce everything to that entry-level program and not deal with the program in its entirety and its complexity, Chair. But I think the training material that I provide will prove that, in fact, the higher you go, the complex the program became, Chair.
And did you say when the training took place, he had not joined?
No, Chair.
When he had not joined PRASA?
So when the first group of people graduated training, we were actually wearing gowns because this was accredited. We had 300 employees. I still have pictures. Some of our employees, they wrote letters to me, Chair, which are employees who have never been to school, but were taken through this program, and they felt quite, that they are, here's a business that is taking care of them, and that even them, they can gain the experience to go through the system and be something else. Because once you got the first one, it means, Chair, that you can also be nominated for the higher forms. So it was aimed at ensuring that you don't become an excess controller for the rest of your life, Chair. Let me say lastly, Chair, that when I joined the SRCC and we incorporated Metro Rail in 2006, one of the biggest problems we found was that there were a lot of employees who have worked for Metro Rail. I think the number was plus minus 4,000. They've worked, some of them, for 10 to 12 years. They were treated as temporary staff. They never received this kind of training. And most of those people became access controllers because I went to the board and said, here's the financial implications, but these people can never be access controllers for temporary employees for the rest of their life. So we then incorporated and became access controllers, and most of them became part of this program. And when we made them full-time, Chair, you wouldn't believe how that changed people's lives. For the first time, someone is able to go to a bank and say, I'm applying for a student loan for my kids. I'm able to apply for a home. Fortunately, I was receiving those letters, and I said, for me, that's what made me wake up, Chair, and look forward to going to work at PRASA, because I knew that my employees, when I came here, Chair, on Friday, the messages they sent to me, some of them were saying, Noma bangatini, whatever they say. We've got a permanent job, we've got a roof over our heads for the first time because you fought for us in that business. So, Chair, I think maybe anomalies, there'll always be. Contradictions are a source of development. We shouldn't be afraid of that. But I think for me, the question, I was not involved because these people were not trained by me. I went to open maybe one or two of the sessions that were there, in the same way that when our employees, for example, some of the senior managers were targeted, we sent them to GIPS to be trained, because this we were saying that we wanted to become now the next level of leadership in the organization. Now, before GIPS take them through the business training, I come then tell them what is PRASA? What kind of business are we trying to do? And Chair, we dedicated a bit of time for that. So yes, anomalies may be there, but was it a good program for our entry-level staff at customer services and later for the management echelons at the entry level? I think, Chair, it was one of the best programs ever. I do not agree with Mr. Dingiswayo's assessment, but yes, I think he's got the right to identify shortcomings that were there, but it doesn't make them criminal. I think for him, Chair, is trying to link the training to Moodle, and that is the problem. If you start in that way, we're going to part ways, because there was no Moodle when I signed that letter. And so I'm taking responsibility. This program, ultimately, the employees at PRASA, the GMs who approved certain things, Chair, but the overall program was endorsed by me as a group chief executive, and I'm confirming that to you, Chair, today.
Thank you.
Just one final question, Chairperson,
Yeah,
because
sure.
I don't want this.
Yes.
This Prodigy contract was not linked to the World Cup at all.
No, this came after the World Cup.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, I just wanted, because I heard you say something about the World Cup and Germans getting our people to smile.
To
and so
smile,
on.
yeah, no.
I just didn't want there to be a link between
But this was linked to creating the new business. Remember before 2010, Chair? 2010 was very important for us because we had invested a lot, but we didn't create a new PRASA, Chair. We were refurbishing, and one of the major things post-2010, we took a very important decision, a strategic decision, that we no longer want to refurbish old trains. We don't want to paint old trains that we know that they don't represent the future. We are going to capitalize this business. We want to recapitalize. So we said we are moving away from refurbishment to recapitalization. Instead of refurbishing trains, it doesn't mean we are not going to refurbish at all. But the key thrust, we are going to invest in new trains. Okay. We took that decision. The result of that is that factory that we see in Danata in Niger, where, Chair, I was so proud when I saw His Excellency, our President, taking investors then saying, South Africa has got a manufacturing plant. And I know, Chair, that I was the champion behind that. And when I see investors saying, if you want to build trains, not only for South Africa, but for the south, for even countries in the southern hemisphere, like Brazil, like Australia, South Africa can actually build those trains in the factory that we built. One thing, Chair, why I defend PRASA so vehemently, I've had people coming here and say money was paid. Okay? It was paid even in advance. But we don't see any value. Chair, I want to assure you, there's no single PRASA project. Whether you deal with this new rolling stock, you deal with Swifambo, you deal with Prodigy, where you find that we spend money and you cannot show and say, this is what we did. With Swifambo, for example, the country can say, here are the locomotives who are using them, and others saying they're too tall. They're not saying they're not locomotives. They're running in the tracks. The commuter trains, you spend 50 billion. We can show them, we can point them. The training, Chair, I took Minister Sibun Ndebele. The first 300 of the employees that were trained by Prodigy, Minister Ndebele in Boksburg, he actually was the main speaker, and he was surrounded, pictures are there. This is actual work. We didn't just take people and pretended and put gown. These were our employees, Chair, who benefited from that particular program. So I think, Chair, that's the one difference about PRASA. Point the shortcomings, and there are probably many, but there are also many achievements that we have recorded. But we'll never have an instance where you say, Chair, like you say, but money has been spent, and we don't know. At PRASA, I can take you can walk with me, Chair, anywhere and say, we spent 100 million there. Here's the result of all of that. And that is why I'll always be an ambassador for PRASA, even if I don't work for that organization, Chair. Even now with the difficulties, let me indicate, Chair, now with the difficulties, I've said to the board of PRASA, I'm not looking for work. But I've offered, Chair, I said, I'm prepared to give you 2 or 3 days, even if I don't come to the office, sitting from home. If you want me to analyze some of your reports and advise on the kind of strategies, I'm available, because this is our country, Chair. I don't want to see PRASA going down because I'm no longer CEO. I want to see PRASA thriving because first and foremost, I'm thinking about, I was at Parkwood, Woolworths. So I keep on buying that chair. The employees look at me, and sometimes I take my daughter, they play with my daughter. One day, as I was leaving Parkwood, recently, chair, they were all crowded. They were crowding me in. I thought I was going to be beaten by these employees. And they were saying, but we live in Soweto. And we used to take a train from Naledi to Park Station and then take a short taxi. And that we could save a lot of money for our families. Trains are no longer there. We are paying even double, more than our salary just to go to work. So, Chair, those are the people that I think about. So the country has given me some skills. I may be fighting with the leadership today, but the skills I'll use to the benefit of our people. And I made that offer, Chair, not to the minister, but to the board, and say, if one day you feel that I should assist you, feel free to come and give me the material. And for example, now the infrastructure is gone, Chair. We need to restore it. And I think that is something that I'm prepared. If you make serious findings against me, Chair, I'm not saying you would. Perhaps one of the things as a mitigating factor, say, he had committed to continue working for the country, say, 5 years, we sentence you, instead of hard labor, go and assist the country in railways. That's what I will do, Chair.
Yeah, but the point you were making about value for money is you are saying we have heard of situations where people are given contracts to build houses, and you find that the money has been given to them, they've been paid, but when you say, where are the houses, they can't show you the houses they built. So you are saying, whatever difficulties or challenges may be pointed out in regard to PRASA, the one thing that can be said, as far as you are concerned, is to say, but where is what was supposed to be done with the money? That's the point you were making.
I'll put my head on the block.
Yeah.
Each and every money or project that we've done, that were within my monitoring screen, all of them have been done.
Yeah.
Whether perfectly or imperfectly, but I think that we have done tremendous work, and part of me coming to this commission is to ensure that the true story of PRASA is told, Chair. Not to deny any shortcomings or weaknesses, but to say the real PRASA known amongst our people should be the one that we present here today, Chair.
Please, Chair.
Let's take the adjournment. It's about 29 minutes past. We'll resume at 11:45. We adjourn.
I want to go back to page 174. You will see there, it is a 72 million rand contract, right? You agree? Page 174.
174.
Yes, on the left-hand side, you'll
174, Chair, and back there, 72 million, Chair.
Yes. Now, that's not a small sum of money, whatever goods or services one is procuring, you agree?
I accept, Chair. Thank you.
Now, I've looked at the terms of the contract because I accepted what Mr. Dinguzwayo had said, that it's a 5-day program. Now, this is the difficulty I have.
Which I rejected.
Yes, no, I understand. This is the difficulty I have. I've looked at the agreement. It doesn't seem to reflect what Prodigy's obligations are in regard to the training that they would provide. Would the training be 5 days? Would it be 10 days? Would it be 20 days? I'm talking about the agreement itself. Would you agree with me?
Chair, perhaps not in that level of detail, but I'll tell you from where I was sitting, some of the things, other than the training, of course. You remember there was also catering for all our employees that were there. And Chair, I think maybe what Mr. Dingiswa, you're confused. I'm not responding to him, but I'm just answering you in that way, was the fact that there were some levels where we were doing a lot of theoretical training. There were, and I think that's when we brought in people together into one place, which I think the total days, for example, for that theoretical training was in the order of 20 days. One of the things, for example, on this program, Chair, particularly where we're dealing with, I think the management levels, if I remember well, was level 4 and 5. Once they've gone through the program, then Prodigy, for example, will assign what we call a mentor to be able to make sure that what this person has been trained is able to apply that in the workplace. So the point I'm making, Chair, I'm saying that maybe didn't, but I think that for me, I had an understanding of what this program needs to deliver. Whether they did that fully, completely, Chair, is a different matter. But when we approve this program, and Chair, by the way, I'm reminded of one thing, or rather two things. I was looking for a word at our Center for Excellence. So we installed a simulator so that we could simulate some of so that the drivers can see a train when, for example, there's fog and everything, different conditions. Part of that in the Center of Excellence, even though it was not done by Prodigy, but the Center of Excellence was meant to be a model that we use throughout the business for that purpose. One of the main reasons why in the discussion between PRASA and Prodigy was the fact that they were, in fact, at that time, if I remember well, the only entity that was accredited with the passenger rail training modules, which they, in fact, they ended up doing for the transport sector as well. So there were reasons, and I think, Chair, I was very clear at an overall level what was their duty, what was Prodigy supposed to do. And most importantly, I saw the graduates with my own eyes. I gave them the certificate, I shook their hands, and I think for me that was the most important. It was a proud moment for our employees, Chair.
Yeah. Mr. Montana, I'm asking an entirely different question. I understand that you are pleased with the program, and I'm not saying you're not entitled. The question I'm asking is, as one sits here with a 72 million rand contract, one says, okay, but if there is a dispute, how is that dispute going to be resolved? So let me just tell you what I looked at. Now, I'd like you to look at page 173 under the heading Phase PRASA My Station Customer Service Skills Program Implementation. engagement phase. And you'll see there it says content phase, implementation of PRASA MyStation customer service skills program training sessions. The theoretical session is 5 days. 149 groups of 20 learners each. We have accommodated for more groups. This will be a 10-day program conducted over a 3 to 6 month period. This is what I don't understand then. How do you say to them, but you were supposed to do 5 days, 10 days, 20 days? It's not written in the program. In the contract? Do you agree?
Chair, yes, but if you look at the table, Chair, you've got the project activity, you've got deliverables, and at the end it tells you who's responsible. Do you see that, Mr. Soni? Where it says Prodigy is responsible for that, Prodigy is responsible for that, then say Prodigy and PRASA. So I think perhaps, maybe, Chair, the way it's been captured, it may not have been. I would concede to that. I won't take issue with that. But I think that from the table that Mr. Soni is referring to, it actually has got 3 sections: activity, deliverables, and the responsible party in that agreement.
Ms. Montana, I've got no difficulty with that. This is my difficulty.
Okay.
72 million rand of taxpayers' money is. Now we say that Prodigy is responsible. PRASA says, somebody in PRASA, you or whoever, you're not delivering. How does one determine what, in terms of the contract, because this is not this is a contract that requires the production of certain things for payment of 72 million rand. Do you agree that it's not in the agreement what Prodigy should do? I know it's responsible, but if there is a dispute.
Chair, maybe, I think for me it's very clear.
I'm sorry, before you respond, I just want to make sure I understood the question. Just repeat the question, Mr. Soni.
I say, Chairperson, that we know that Prodigy is to provide training. That's the deliverable, as they call it in the business world. Now, if there's a dispute about whether it has delivered or not, say Mr. Montana understood that they will have training for each person over 20 days in the 6-month period. But Prodigy provides training for 12 days. And there's a dispute about it. One can't turn to the contract to say, no, but you're supposed to provide 20 days.
I see that at page 173, there is a column there that says this will be a 10-day program conducted over a 3 to 6 month period. Each learner must complete the program in a maximum of 6 months.
Yes.
And now is the question that's not set in the contract, it should have been in the contract, or is the question a different one?
Well, the question is, it starts off by saying the theoretical session is 5 days.
Sorry?
The sentence before that says the theoretical session is 5 days.
Yes.
Then it says this will be a 10-day program.
Yes.
Conducted over a 3 to 6 month period.
Yes.
Each learner must complete the program in a maximum. But what it doesn't say is whether the 5 days, the theoretical days, is included in the 10 days.
Yes.
And
so it's not about where the point is made, where the issue is covered. It's
Yes.
about whether it's clear or vague.
That's the only point I want
That's
to
the
make.
only point, okay? Mr.
Chair.
Montana?
Chair, I think, look, at the time when I look at, I hear what Mr. Son is saying, but at the time, you see, it says the theoretical session, which means the theoretical part of the training
Yeah,
it will be for 5 days and 149 groups of 20 learners each. Chair tells you the kind of activity that is supposed to take place there, and that theoretical work, Chair, if they are called for 5 days, but over a period of 6 months, Chair, they do that training. The point that I think Mr. Son is making, that the contract maybe doesn't provide, and I've said that there are disputes, for example, about the release of employees by PRASA, and you'll see there is a gray area where PRASA said, but it was your job to make sure that you ask for them, and this guy said, but it was your duty to make sure that there's an employer that they are released. So yes, there are those kind of gray areas, Chair. But I think that in terms of clear deliverables, I think that as far as I'm concerned, Chair, they're quite detailed in this. And by the way, let's not look at what we have in front of us, Chair, in isolation from the partnership agreement, as well as the thing, because this is just a detailed activity now beyond what I signed. But because the partnership agreement I signed didn't have that level of detail. Yeah, but if you go further down with the addendums and even the amounts, those are detailed in the contract. Are they covered enough that if there is that kind of a problem, I would concede, Chair, I wouldn't take up issues with that. I wouldn't argue against that.
I'll tell you what my initial understanding is, Mr. Soni, and of course, if it becomes a serious issue, one can look at it and so on. I understand the 5 days of theory to be part of the 10 days, because they say this will be a 10-day program. So understand that to say, in total, this program requires 10 days.
Yes.
So when in the earlier sentence they say the theoretical session is 5 days, I take that to mean the 10 days is divided into two: the theoretical session and maybe what I would call the practical session.
Yes.
That's my initial understanding.
That's what I understood as well,
Yes,
Chairperson.
yes.
And I'm just trying, in a sense, to say
Yes.
that, and it was in answer to matters Mr. Montana raised,
Yes.
where he said, well, it was longer than 5 days, but we now know it's 10 days. And so we have 20 learners, 149 sessions, and each learner to pay 24,000 Rand for 10 days. That's effect. So it may not be 5 days, but nevertheless, it is 24,000 Rand for
Yeah.
10 days, but we can
Yes.
put a figure on that.
Yes.
No, Chair. No.
Yes.
I think let's correct that. Chair, I think we are picking up.
Obviously, Mr. Stone is giving his understanding.
His understanding.
Yes.
Now I'm giving my understanding,
Yeah,
Chair.
give us your understanding.
Chair, no, the program was not 10 days for 24,000. We are talking about the theoretical part of, you remember that we are talking about a number of other activities. For example, those at level 4 and 5. They will not do that stuff, but they will do entry to management as one example, Chair. So this 10 days, we are referring to the groups, the 149 groups of 20 learners each, which they can, and I think, Chair, you summarized it properly, that the theoretical part could be, let's say, 10 days in 5 days. So it means people must come together at one place for that theory for that week, and then come later on. But if you look at the entire activity, We're talking about an activity, of course, for specifically the theoretical session. They said it will take between 3 to 6 months. Now, that paragraph doesn't define the totality of the training, Chair. It refers to a specific aspect of the program. The program was if you look at that, I mean, people were trained, some of them for a period of over a year. Okay, so I'm simply saying that do not reduce this training to that block. That block simply suggests one activity amongst many. Chair, that is why I was saying earlier on, one of the things that I will do, because I won't go through each one of them. I mean, when you place a mentor, you train like Imuntana, you place him back to his that thing. You know, one of the things about this thing, Chair, when somebody travels, let's say on a train, is dealing with customer service, or is at the station, we require these mentors to be there with the people. You calculate the number. Now that is beyond the what is it called, the theoretical training around that. And then the guys who are the higher level on management. Chair, I think that it's a much more advanced thing. It's like when you get to university to do management science. That's why we'll start you from. And who are the people who are evaluating and assessing these people, Chair? Those are not their managers. It is actually resources that were brought in by Prodigy into the business to do exactly that. So I'm saying the 24,000 covers a whole range of activity and not simply what you will read in that blockchain.
Well, with what you have just said, I'm not sure that my earlier understanding as I articulated it is correct. Because you are saying to me the 10 days mentioned here for the program is not the whole program. You say it's maybe one activity. There were many others. So you say, in other words, you say this 10-day program was one part of a larger program.
Yes, this was the theory training part, Chair.
Yeah.
The theory only. And the other activities, Chair, you see that they are...
But they say the theory is 5 days. So it can't, the theory can't be 10 days. Or at least this is what this says.
Yes, it says that so which means a session, one session. So if we define that for 5 days, so that would be a session. So it says that, so it could be, this would be a 10-day program. And I think you summarized it correctly, Chair, when you said it means one session could be 5 days, and you come later on and do another 5 days.
Yes, what my understanding was is this, that the program over which should take 10 days would have a theoretical part and a practical part. The practical part is my invention, just to contrast it with the theoretical part. The theoretical part was allocated 5 days of the 10 days. And then the rest, which is 5 days, would be, let's now do practicals. Let's see whether you understood the theory, and you go and do the work, and then maybe we can observe or whatever. Or the simulation that you were talking about, maybe to say, now we've given you the theory, now let's show us how you would do this following the theory that you have been taught. That was my understanding. You say that is still fine.
No, Chair. My understanding is that you have the 10 days, the entire 10 days, even if you do them in 2 blocks of 5 days, is the theoretical part. It doesn't involve the practical part of the issue.
Yeah.
That is why I'm saying to Mr. Soni that block, that box that is referring to, is not the totality of the program. For example, if you deal with mentors, and I think that there's a whole range of activities, Chair, in the... you see, Chair, this addendum is actually trying to give effect to the partnership agreement, because that detail, you will not find it in the partnership agreement. And I think, Chair, that, so I'm simply saying that you'll see that when you go through each and every box, you are finding the project activity beyond the 10 days for theory, and that the other activity is not listed in that box. So the 24,000 doesn't relate to that box. It refers to people who would have been trained over a period, I'll say between 3 months to a year into that program, with 10 days only on theory, particularly for those entry levels.
What is going to be necessary, because I think it's important, particularly because I think Mr. Soni was asking, in order to assess the amount of 24,000 rand per learner in terms of, in relation to the content of the training. So it's going to be important that we have, I have a full picture. So I don't know to what extent all the documentation that is here, to what extent the documentation we have here is everything, to what extent there might be documentation elsewhere which would help us understand. And obviously, if Mr. Montana, you have documentation at home that could assist, that would be helpful. Because the difficulty I have at the moment with what you are saying is that it seems to me to be not in accordance with what this says. But it may be that that's because I'm looking at this document only. Once I see other documents, I might see the point you make.
I provide some of that detail in my annexes to my
yes.
affidavit. So I think that I'll send it even separately
Yes.
to enhance that understanding. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Finally, Mr. Montana, on this contract, and I just ask you, who drew up this contract, PRASA or Prodigy?
Chair, I think the contract was drawn up by Mr. Lindika Azide, who was the company secretary and was responsible for legal services at PRASA. And that's the submission, that's where I got it, Chair. So whether they drafted it or vetted it, I think, but it came from there.
I'm going to suggest when one looks at this that it is a Prodigy document, but that's neither here nor there, because my next question is this. Before you signed, did you take legal advice from the PRASA people?
Yes, Chair. Chair, I think let me actually deal with the process that we follow, because...
Oh, I'm sorry, has he finished? Have you finished your question?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all right.
So the answer is yes, but let me take this opportunity to indicate how we, you see, for me as CEO, I deal with a lot of things. And when somebody deals with a program, they want to motivate for its approval. They write memos, Chair. They put together a memo motivating also, putting forget what's the benefit for the business, whether we've got the budget for it, and all of those things, Chair. And the legal advice will tell, the legal people will tell me, for example, and say, no, we are not happy with it, Chair. In some instances, and I think when we deal maybe with the Siangena matter, you'll see, for example, Chair, that we, for the later contracts, we use a standard contract that is used, for example, in the industry. We sign that contract. Someone will say it doesn't come from PRASA, but that is different, Chair, to this one is different because we did it. If you look at, when I deal with the worksman's issue, Chair, when you look at the letter of engagement that PRASA signed, that was signed by Mr. Nati Khaina, it's a letter that is written by Werksmans on its letterhead. It provides the terms and everything. And what PRASA did was sign. And the person who signed on behalf of PRASA, Nati Khaina, he didn't even sign it receiving it from advice from the legal team. He signed it at a restaurant in a shop. So Chair, this is in my affidavit. So I think that maybe what Mr. Dingiswa, your Chair, was trying to say was that when he came, he found this in place. But I think it would be better if the commission were to actually ask the former head of legal, the former company secretary, Mr. Lindika Azide, and say, were you involved? Did you draft this contract and all of this? It came from their Chair. And I'm saying that I'm giving the commission a specific name. There's Mr. Mpefu Ramutwa, who who was our acting HR executive. Let's ask him, Chair. There's a lady in Cape Town who was part of the customer services team, Miss Valerie, I can't recall her surname. They were part of all of those in Chair, and I think each of these employees can be asked to depose to an affidavit to the commission, and you'll see, Chair, that between the time we started and maybe the time that Mr. Dingiswayo dealt with this matter, it's a completely different world, Chair. So, Mr. Soni made, Chair, a very serious statement that it is a Prodigy document, not a PRASA document. And of course, I'm the one who's being asked questions. I shouldn't be asking questions. But I thought it would be fair if Mr. Soni were to tell me the basis of his statement, Chair. Is he saying that I was misled as CEO with this document? So we need to find out what exactly is the concern, Chair, because I'm saying as a CEO, I'm taking responsibility for this.
Yes. No.
Yeah.
That's fine. Mr. Soni will mention, but as I understand your position, it shouldn't matter from your point of view whether it's a Prodigy, it came from Prodigy or from PRASA, as long as the content was acceptable. In other words, the terms and conditions were acceptable. There is no issue with you, because you say there were others which were signed like that. Or did I misunderstand?
You know, Chair, part of the problem that difficulty with people working with me, I like to get into detail, and I write.
Yeah.
And that is why when I come to the commission, I can't say it was a junior employee who signed. I signed. And that is why I can talk about it here. So Chair, I'll assure you that if it means I stay the whole night reading this thing, that's what I'll do. And if I'm not happy with it, I'll indicate change there and there. And I'm satisfied here, Chair. Did Prodigy make business? They were not doing this thing for Mahala, Chair. There's no doubt that Prodigy was doing business. Do you think that we're getting the benefit of this program? I'm saying that I'm satisfied that we did.
Yes, but basically your answer to my question is yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Soni?
Mr. Montana, you heard the chairperson say, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who drew it up. I am a lawyer. I look at documents and I says, between this company and this company, who is likely to have drawn it up? It was not an indictment of you. And that's specifically why I asked you, did you take legal advice? Because I've indicated to you that Prodigy's deliverables are not expressed. And you've seemed to have conceded. So when I ask you, did you take legal advice, it is simply on the basis that a 72 million rand contract should not be concluded without legal advice, whoever drew up the contract.
Mr. Soni, I didn't concede that the deliverables are here, Chair. And I think that we have how many pages of deliverables? I've said that we've got a document which indicates one, project activity, deliverables, and responsibilities.
I think what you conceded or may have conceded is there may be some vagueness about
absolutely, Chair.
About the duration.
Absolutely,
but
Chair.
I understood you also to say, as far as you are concerned, the deliverables are there.
Yes.
There is a column that says deliverables. There is a column that says responsible
Person, yeah.
person. Yeah. Okay, Mr. Soni.
Mr. Montana, we must move on. Can I now ask you to look at 14.2, please, on page 102?
102.
Yes. This is Mr. Dingiswayo's affidavit.
Page 102, that's where I'm, Chair.
14.2.
Yeah.
Mr.
Are
Dingiswayo?
we moving away from that partnership stroke agreement with
yes.
training?
Yes.
Yes. I had Mr. Montana say that Mr. Dingiswayo suggests, maybe by implication, I'm not sure, that that training arrangement should have gone out to open tender. Is that something that is an issue or not?
I am going to come to.
Oh, you'll come to it, okay, all right.
Now, he says at 14.2, about February or March 2015, I was asked by the contracts manager at SCM, Mr. Sidney Kuzuwayo, to draft an agreement to reinstate and extend 2 earlier contracts. Are you aware of that?
Well, Chair, at that time I was not, but later on when I see some of the documents in respect of this matter, I noted that point, Chair.
All right. And you accept that he was asked to extend those 2 earlier contracts?
Chair, I'm saying that I saw that in the documents. I don't know what was driving it, but you'll see, for example, that when I answer that question later, I deal with it later. I think, in fact, Chair, I deal with it in my affidavit, that what has happened here, Mr. Dingiswa is describing a specific process with people at the SCM. But I'm suggesting that beyond that, there was something where they've identified, and he said it's certain entities, and he had then arrogated to himself powers to block, for example, contracts that were there that he felt were irregular, and he was not doing that consistently. So the interaction, in fact, in my one of my emails, I'm not sure if they've attached, is attached here, Chair. I take up issues with him and with Mr. Kuzuwayo, and I'll check if my email has been attached here, because already at that time we were on a slippery path. Things were happening that they'll go to legal, or legal will come and say we're reviewing this contract and decide that this contract is irregular. Then finance will then be told, do not make payments. That's not how an organization works, Chair. Legal is a supporting function, doesn't run the business. Legal, for example, they would advise business, the people who are running that particular project, and in this particular case, it will be Group HR, Human Capital Management. And if they're unhappy, they'll then elevate that to me and say, Group CEO, we think there's a problem with this particular contract, then list those, and then make a recommendation. Chair, in all of these contracts that they were reviewing and taking decisions, there was never one instance where our group legal wrote a memo and said, Mr. Montana, we think there's a problem, and then I reject what they were saying. Here they are attacking me, and they cannot produce one iota of evidence to say we brought that to the attention of the group CEO and he didn't support us, or we pick up an act, corruption and he didn't act on it. It never happened, Chair, and I'm making that point very strongly in my affidavit that Mr. Dingiswa has a right to say, I'm picking up issues that makes me uncomfortable. But the process of dealing with that, don't fight political battles, don't target people. If you are a true professional, document that, give them to your immediate supervisor. In this case, it would have been Mrs. Ngoye. And then if that is not, then they are elevated to the group CEO. It was never done, Chair. And what happens is that we've made commitments, and that is why PRASA today is so involved in so many litigation, precisely because of this approach.
But your response to 14.2, is it that you don't know whether he was asked by Mr. Kuzuwayo to do what he says he was asked to do, but you note it? Or you'd say you do know that he was asked?
Chair, I did see the emails exchanges between not only the two of them, but a number of people. But who initiated it?
Yeah,
I wouldn't say with certainty, Chair.
Okay, all right.
Right. He then continues, and I'm still at 14.2. After reviewing the matters, I raised a number of compliance issues. Were you aware of that?
No, Chair, they were never raised with me.
Yeah, no, I don't think he says he raised it with you. He was asked by the contracts manager, and it seems he raised it with them. Anyway, he goes on to say, however, on the 1st of April, Prodigy sent an email to the office of the CEO asking about outstanding payments. Is that correct?
Are you referring to the last sentence
Yes.
of 14.2?
Yes. The answer is either yes or no, Mr. Montana. Did they
Well-
send an email or not?
No, Chair, I can't recall exactly, Chair.
Yes.
I'm not denying it, but I can't recall.
Yes.
No, I understand
Okay.
that perfectly. And then at 14.3, he says, I later raised questions about certain issues relating to the drafting of the proposed agreement and said until these were addressed, I would not begin drafting the agreement. Were you aware that that was his position?
Chair, I was not aware, but let's assume 14.3 is correct, Chair. It was not up to
Yes.
it was not up to him to decide whether to draft or not. That is why he had the duty to elevate to the right person and to engage business. And if as a business we come to the conclusion that we are agreeing with the concerns you are raising, then it's fine. But Mr. Dingiswayo, in his position as a general manager, did not have the authority to say what they say in 14.3. If we run a business that way, Chair, then we're going to have a problem.
You say he wasn't the right person to say whether he should draft or not without raising his concerns up to the highest level if necessary.
Well, Chair, I'm saying firstly, he had the right to raise those concerns that
Yeah.
he said to identify.
Yes.
But the decision is not his.
Yeah.
He had to decide, for example, to say, I'm going to raise this with my immediate boss, and I'm also going to raise this with the executive, group executive responsible for HR in the business. And if there's agreement there, that's a route to take.
That's where it ends.
That's where it ends. If they say, no, we agree with you, you don't draft an agreement. But if they say, no, we think you are wrong, this is a strategy that we're following as a business, it's not up to you to decide that I would not begin drafting the agreement. And there's a second matter, Chair, that I'm raising. Consistent with 14.3, and if I may raise it now, it's in my affidavit. Chair, when the former group executive for legal, who brought Fanny Dingiswayo to the business, left the company, we said we reached an agreement that we'll part ways. We had a separation agreement. This was facilitated by our group HR function together with legal. So this was done, and we signed, then we reached agreement that then we'll part ways on certain terms. We signed and everything went. Then she then came back, the executive, after she's left. She then said, look, there are certain things that I thought are standard, even if they are not in this particular contract that we've signed. I was not leaving them out. So the money that you want to pay to me, okay? So she declared a dispute with PRASA. Our group HR brought to my attention at that time that, look, they've asked legal to help them with the case. Again, consistent with 14.3. He refused to assist business in this big issue, Chair. So here you've got someone who believes that he's got the right to decide whatever he wants in the business. He's not accountable, and he's my former boss. I'm not going to represent the interest of the business because his duty owes his loyalty to us. He's got a duty to protect the business. And if business, in this case, group, human capital, ask him and say, we want you to help us into this, he cannot say, I'm not going to draft an agreement or I'm not going to brief counsel out there to take up this issue. So, Chair, I have a problem with that. And that is why when I called Dingiswayo to my office, I said, you have done this not on one issue, but on a number of issues. And the reason why you are doing it, Chair, and you will not understand the context, Chair. Can I ask for indulgence? Because I want to go one step back, Chair, so that I can assist the Chair, so that you understand what is my objection on this issue.
Okay.
Chair, when I went on leave in December 2014, Ms. Ngoy acted in my position. But in January, before I came back, I think I was coming back late in the middle of or late January 2015. I was called to Cape Town by the Minister of Transport. I was still on leave, but to say, look, we've got an event, a big event here. It was an ANC January 8 event here. But there's a problem with transport. Can you help us to develop a transport plan so that we can move the masses of people around the Cape Metro and everything? I flew to Cape Town. Sent two people to go and meet with the minister, and later joined to make sure that this big event is not, it runs smoothly. It was an ANC event, Chair. Now, what happened is that during that time, I met with the chairman of the board. We then agreed.
Was that Mr. Molefe?
No, Mr. Molefe. In 2015
Yes.
was Mr. Molefe. During that time, Chair, we had a lot of discussion.
And the minister at that time was Ms. Peters.
Minister Peters. So I said, no, let me talk to the chairman so that he knows that even though I'm on leave, that I've been called to assist in making sure there's a proper transport plan for the January 8 event of the ANC. So when I met with the chair, when I met with the chairman of the board, Mr. Molefe, we discussed a number of issues. To my surprise and even shock, Mr. Molefe then raised a number of issues and he said, we'll discuss them when you come back from leave. One of them was about another contract. And this contract was about, and it's not a literal contract, it's like this Prodigy issue, where PRASA employees would borrow money, and the lender then would get authority that, okay, we gave you 15,000 or 100,000. The PRASA agrees from its HR function to deduct the money and pay it over to us. He raised a number of issues. One of them was exactly that issue, Chair, and say, PRASA is supposed to pay, and she used the word amashonisa, 28 million rand. Now I'm on leave, Chair. And he raised a number of other issues. So I said, no, Chair, no. Please, let's hold, Chair. There's no mashonisa here. There's a legitimate company which renders, it provides services to our employees. When an employee get that money, they sign that PRASA can deduct a certain amount and pass it over to that company. PRASA deducted that money but didn't pay to this company, Chair. And the chair was, so I corrected the chair there and there. I said, we'll discuss it when I come back from leave, but these are the facts. He even joked and said, hey, but you seem to know everything about this business. I said, no, Chair, but the people who provided, I was with you, I'm on leave. And if everyone come and feed information like that, and that company then got into dispute with us precisely because it is part like, excuse me, Chair, like Prodigy, like the issue about the group executive who left, and this particular one, the Mashonisa, as it was called. They decide that no, it's irregular. Okay? They don't pay that company. Okay? It's a payroll.
Who decided?
It is our group legal under
Mr. Dingiswayo. Okay.
So what I'm trying to say is that they've identified a number of contracts or entities.
Yes.
Now, this company is not known to me, Chair. It's providing a service. Employees, when they go and buy money, lend money there, they don't come to Group CEO and say, we're going to go to that company. And I don't know this company. But here are people who then give themselves. They don't even check with business, which is Group HR in this instance. We are performing a payroll function on behalf of that company effectively. What is the benefit? Okay? Now, part of why these companies play an important role, if your employees are highly indebted, it's a measure that assists you on how to manage your business and your employees. It also, when you deal with increases in salaries and everything, and the way you structure the whole package to our employees, because it's aimed at making sure that your employees are not highly indebted. A train driver is highly indebted. When he gets, I went to one accident scene, and a train driver who clearly was involved in an accident, we find that he had this, what is it called, his salary pay slip there. Okay? And you can see this driver was in trouble. So the point I'm making, Chair, is
Yes, I
that,
wanted to say, let's stop the detour now.
Exactly, Chair.
I know you wanted to give a
so I
certain
can go
context, yeah.
through a number of things, Chair, that all these entities that they say are irregular are entities when I went on leave, they started to identify, and they felt they've got the authority, Chair, to say, and I would be ashamed, Chair, if I was Mr. Dingiswai, I would not say that, and said until these were addressed, I would not begin drafting the agreement. This is a very arrogant statement by someone who doesn't have the authority. And when I dismissed Mr. Dingiswaya, I said to him when I called him to the office, I realized that when I ask these companies complain or they bring issues to my attention, and I ask business, they say legal has stopped. So you are part, and I use those words. In an email, and I hope this email is here, Chair, I didn't mince my words because I realized that this was part of a concerted effort to undermine the business and undermine my leadership in the business. And I wouldn't accept that, Chair. This 14.3, Chair, I thought if I were Dingiswa, I would hide it and not be as blatant of where I stand, Chair. And I think it's bad.
Yeah, okay. All right. Mr. Sonnen?
As you please, Your He then says at paragraph 14.4, on the 10th of April, Prodigy sent a further email, this time setting out what the thrust and purposes of the agreements were. Was that an email that was sent to you?
No, Chair.
All right, then let's turn to page 14, paragraph 14.5.
And it doesn't attach the email, Mr. Sonnen?
Chairperson, the difficulty with that is he didn't have it.
Yes.
As you will see.
Part of the, I've noticed maybe in 3 parts now. You say, for example, when he says, I raised questions in 14.3,
Yes.
it doesn't tell us he raised questions with whom. And now in 14.4, he says Prodigy sent a further email, but it doesn't say who was it addressed to. And it says it set out the thrust and purposes of the agreements. But one would have thought that if he doesn't, one assumes that he has seen the email.
Chairperson, the difficulty, and as you will see, he says that the email showed that Ms. Shanmugam knew what was going on in PRASA, so it was obviously an important email. When I asked after the email, his answer to me was that he was on suspension at the time and he had no access to his email. So that's why he couldn't review.
Yes, well.
Not in April, I don't think Mr. Dingiswa was in suspension at the time, Chair.
No, I'm talking about at the commission.
At the time of,
At the time
you mean when he gave
statement,
evidence,
yes.
when he gave evidence in the commission. Yeah, one would have liked that if he didn't attach the email, at least he says who it was addressed to and what it said. Yeah, okay, all right.
Then at 14.5, he says, on the 18th of April, I was provided with a draft service level agreement that had been sent to me by Ms. Nonchalanchla Kondiwe. I set out my concern.
Kondowe.
Oh, Kondowe, sorry.
Yes,
sorry.
yeah.
I set out my concerns in an email which I sent to, among others, Ms. Kondowe. I also sent this email to the then Group Procurement Officer, Mr. Pungula. Are you aware of that email?
No, I wasn't aware, Chair, but I think if that was our approach, that was a correct approach.
All right, then at 14.6 he says, it appears that there was a general acceptance that the contracts were invalid, but a view was put forward that Prodigy was innocent and that PRASA should therefore proceed with the transaction. Are you aware of that view, Mr. Montana?
The one in 14.5?
14.6. It's the top of page 103.
Yes, no, Chair, I read that. I don't know who was the general acceptance. And Chair, that's where the problem comes.
Yeah, he also doesn't say who put forward that view.
And the paragraph, when it goes down, says, but Mr. Montana contended that there was nothing wrong with the extension of the... So there's a general agreement, and so the general is the masses chair, and then the CEO has got a different view. You know, that paragraph is problematic. Even all of those things, Chair, because there are people in meetings. You know, these things are not dealt with by 18,000 employees. There are very specific people involved in this. Okay? Ms. Kondowe will be one person. The guy on training is, I can't recall his name, Mr. Allen. There's the group executive HR. There's a procurement people. Before it even comes, it's recommended to me. Now, this general view, Chair, who does it represent? And so what must I do as CEO? Because there's a general view, I must agree to it. You know, so Chair, you can see that it's not specific. It is making us actually to search for things that I don't think is right, Chair. Unless if he tells us that who specifically said it is invalid, and that's the point I was making earlier on, that you have employees who decide that it's invalid, and you'll see, Chair, I'm interested in the annex, Chair, the end of that thing, because I think I'm hoping it is the email that I wrote to this chat, that they're now starting to play games with the business.
We'll get to that in a moment. Let me just deal with this issue that you raised. Did you share the view that the contracts were invalid?
No,
yourself?
I didn't share that vision.
Okay. And that the reason it should be proceeded with is because Prodigy was innocent. You didn't share that.
I don't know where that view, where this discussion is taking
but no,
place.
we know, we've heard your criticism, Mr. Montana. Let's move on. You've made your point that it's too vague. I'm just asking you about yourself, your state of mind. Then he says on the 18th of May, Mr. Montana sent an email contending there was nothing wrong with the extension of the contract and alleged that certain contracts were being targeted and a dirty campaign was being waged against him. A copy of this email is annexed as MMD 8. And can I ask you to turn to, I'll tell you in a moment what page it is. Page 187, Mr. Montana.
187.
Have you got that?
Yeah, I've got that, yeah.
This is the email you were hoping would be in the annexures. Am I right?
Indeed, Chair.
All right. Let's just look at this email. This is an email sent from you. Is that correct?
Chair, that's my email, Chair. It confirms what I've just said earlier on. Yes.
All right. And it's dated the 18th of May at 3:14 p.m.
But that's my email, Chair. Exactly.
No, Mr. Montana, you must accept that I've heard everything you say. I'm asking a question so that the record will reflect.
No, Mr. Soni, it's under control.
I'm confirming.
He's responding correctly. It's under control.
The email is addressed to Ms. Kondowi, is that right? And Mr. Dingazwayo and Mr. Kuzwayo.
Indeed, Chair.
And it's CC'd to a number of people. And the subject matter of, including Ms. Ngoyi, subject matter is My Station Program, Prodigy. Is that
That's
correct?
correct, Chair.
Now that's the contract we were talking about. The 72 million rand contract. Is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
Now, in the email you say, Dear Nonchalanchla, there is nothing wrong with the appointment of Prodigy, nor with the extensions of their contract. I am not surprised because this is part of a much bigger agenda which has targeted certain contracts and appointments and to project these as being irregular. Some of the contracts had already been leaked to external auditors and the media as part of a strategy to discredit the group CEO and create a cloud before he steps down at the end of the year. Now, this is a point you made much earlier this morning and a little while ago.
Indeed, Chair. Indeed.
Then you go on to say, this is a well-coordinated strategy that started in November 2012 when I went on leave. I will at the most appropriate time act against all those who were involved in this dirty campaign. The investigation they are starting is unlawful and part of a plot I am well aware of. That's also part of what you were saying.
That's me, Chair. That's me speaking here. It
And that
adequately captures my state of mind at that time.
Yes, and that investigation you are talking about there, which one is that?
The one that I reported about, that when I met with the Chair, I realized that he told me about a number of things. When I met him in Cape Town,
Oh, okay.
that the number of things, Amachonis,
Yeah.
So it's not only Prodigy, it's not there's a whole range of them, Chair, that when I went on leave, suddenly these things, they popped up and they looked at, Chair. And you'll see my conclusion in that email, Chair, to say what I regard as the basis for these activities.
Yeah, okay, no, that's fine. Continue, Mr. Soni.
As you please. The extent of the letter continues, the email continues. The extent of opportunism by some of our managers really amazes me. A manager like Sydney Kuzwayo should start first by cleaning the many irregular appointments he was party to within SCM, which I have been trying to address, and even explaining some of these to the Office of the Public Protector. Some of the managers are excited by the new board and are feeding all sorts of wrong information so that they could curry favor with the board. They will be the biggest losers at the end of the process. And it goes on. The decision to partner with Prodigy on the training customer services remains sound, and the extension of the contract is still in order. Please allow them to continue with their strategy, which is bound to fail. That's the text of your email.
Thank you, Chair.
Maybe it would help that as we proceed, we know who you identified as being behind this campaign you are talking about. Maybe as we proceed, that will help to know who you are talking about, or who were the people that you say were behind the campaign.
Well, Chair, the main driver, of course, was the chairman of the board, Mr. Molefe. And that is why, as I said, that I corrected some of these things when I saw him in Cape Town. And they became part of the major propaganda out there, this information being fed to the newspaper. Some of the journalists were writing all these stories. There was a big offensive, Chair. The issue that I had is that all these employees didn't have the authority. The authorities resided with the executives, resided with the group CEO, and in some instances with the board as to what we declare as irregular or not irregular. And Chair, and my affidavit,
Okay, Mr. Montana, I understand. I just want us to know the personalities that you regarded as behind the campaign. So one, it was the chairperson.
the chair, it was Ms. Ngoya herself.
Yes.
It was Mr. Dingiso Ayo.
Yes.
And I think Mr. Sidney Kuzwayo was party to that.
Yes, those were the four people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chair, the person who raised all these issues, by the way, on Prodigy, I can't recall Alan's surname, but he was in our HR grouping department. And these were the ones who wanted us to appoint some other people. So they had their own preferred people, Chair. And if it didn't go their way, they started this campaign. They started feeding the board, but more specifically, Mr. Molefe, with this sort of information. And he ran with the staff. And I was prepared to, Chair, to bring an end to that.
You say you can't remember his surname, but his name was Alan.
Alan, I'll remember the name as you continue, Chair.
Yeah.
Not
There's a-
Alan Gangia.
Alan Genge, Chair.
Alan?
He was Alan Genge.
Gangia.
Oh, okay.
He was responsible for training at PRASA, and I think he used to sit on the board of the Transport Training Authority, TITA, on the site of PRASA.
But you say he was also part of the
He
campaign?
was part of this, particularly more specifically on issues related to Prodigy, Chair.
Yeah.
Chair, you'll see in my affidavit, I actually detailed some of the files because all of these people were lobbying me to get the support.
Yeah.
So I'm aware of their battles.
Yes.
And when it comes to the commission, after either losing the battle inside or they put themselves as holier than thou. And that's not true, Chair.
Okay, all right. Mr. Soni?
Yes, and let's get back to we've dealt with your email, Mr. Montana. Now, this is, in fairness to him, Mr. Dingazwayo's comment on your email, and it appears as the last line on paragraph 14.6, where he says, for the record, I dispute the allegations. In other words, the allegations made in the email. That's what I understood him. And he disputes.
And I know that, Chair, except to say one thing, Chair, that, you see, when you use information selectively, and you'll see again, Chair, in my affidavit and my annexures, where Mr. Dingiso says, the group CEO, when he approved the Prodigy partnership, was misled. He says that in 2015. This thing happened in 2010. So 5 years, he was not there, Chair. He comes and says he was misled. Now, when you look at what he said and what he said in his email in 2015, it will be part of my annexure. There's just no correlation, Chair. Okay? And you can see that he's very focused. What he's trying to drive at here, he's trying to get that there's a relationship between Prodigy, Montana, and one Roy Moodley. If you analyze the affidavit, and that is why I'm dealing with it in detail in my affidavit, because it's got nothing to do with facts, it has to do with pursuing an agenda, and that was the basis for targeting contracts. Strawberry is targeted, Chair. Who signed the contract with Strawberry? Not Lucky Montana. It's signed by Martha Ngoye. She comes to the commission and says Montana promoted Strawberry. Because why? It's linked, because they say it's linked to a Moodley. So it's a narrative, Chair, that we must break with solid facts, and that's what I'm going to do throughout my testimony.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just want to say, Mr. Soni, that I would have expected Mr. Dingiswayo to have given his reasons for the view that the contracts were invalid, or the Prodigy contract was invalid before getting to the point where we are. But maybe he does that later.
He doesn't do that in so many words. He does that in regard to the SLA, Chair.
Because you see, there may be something to be said for what Mr. Montana says in relation to paragraph 14.6, namely that he says, here was the general view that everybody had, namely they accepted that these contracts were invalid. Here was an exception, Mr. Montana. But one would have expected him to motivate, to say it was invalid because of A, B, C, D, so that when we come, so that we can then weigh Mr. Montana's different view against the reasons given.
Chairperson, perhaps I can suggest why it is done that way.
Yes,
given
yes.
what he says about it.
Yes.
You asked earlier, Chairperson, whether there was a procurement process. And I should just ask Mr. Montana that question now, because that may reduce the sting of the question that you are posing.
Yeah.
Mr. Montana, may I ask you, we've been through how the agreement came into being. Was there a procurement process that
No, Chair.
gone
No, Chair.
I'm sorry, I haven't had the question.
in? I say, was there a procurement process before the first agreement was concluded between Prodigy and
Correct.
PRASA?
And the answer is no.
No, the answer is no, Chair.
Yeah.
We don't. The nature of the partnership and the offer that we receive, Chair, is not one that requires what is it called, a tender process or procurement process in that way. But what will happen, Chair, though, is that even in instances like those, and that is why Mr. Dingiswayo speaks of the chief procurement officer, because even if something doesn't go out on tender, it still has to serve through the structures and the committees when it's recommended to me. That is very important, Chair. But the nature of the program, Chair, is like somebody say, did you go out on tender for the 2010 FIFA World Cup? No, it's a FIFA event. It's not our event. We partner with them, Chair. It's not, we can't go out on tender for that. So there was none here. So the answer is no, Chair.
But I don't want us to confuse this, and that's why you might remember just before tea, I asked you, I said to you, the first contract is in October 2010. It could not be related to FIFA, so let's leave FIFA out of it.
No, but Mr. Soni, I think he makes an example that appears to me to support the point he makes.
Exactly.
On the face of it, he's saying there are certain circumstances where you don't go out on tender, and he says FIFA is one such example. It may well be that on the merits of FIFA you might not be correct, Mr. Montana, because prior to FIFA awarding the 2010 World Cup to South Africa, a lot of countries were competing to be awarded this. So maybe that might not be such a good example. But I think the point you are making is there are certain circumstances when PRASA or any government entity would not be required to go out on tender.
Indeed, Chair.
And rightly or wrongly, you believe that this one was one such a case.
That's
As
correct.
I say, you made the example about FIFA. Might not back up that point, but yeah.
I got no difficulty. I just didn't want that.
Yes.
Because it seems to be I don't think Mr. Montana intends it that way.
Yes.
Just for record purposes, I wanted, and because we're talking about 2010, I just wanted to draw that distinction.
Okay.
But I accept
Okay.
both what you say and what Mr.
Yes.
Montana says.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Montana, within SCM processes in organs of state, and PRASA is an organ of state, there is a mechanism to deal with what is called an unsolicited offer. Is that true?
Correct, Chair.
Would that invitation to enter into a partnership be what one would call an unsolicited offer?
Well, Chair, I saw that there was you remember unsolicited offers or bids are dealt with through a treasury rule. I think treasury regulation at that time it didn't apply to this one specifically, Chair. But there are instances where treasury rules, for example, on unsolicited bids, would come into effect, and what will happen, Chair, is that the group chief procurement officer of PRASA will then advise and say, if we're going an unsolicited route, the rules apply, and this is how we should go about doing it.
So you, as you sit here, can't say whether this was treated as an unsolicited, when you were given advice that you should accept it, you don't know whether your legal section was saying you could do it because it's an unsolicited bid and it fits the requirements, or whether it was being done on some treasury regulation.
No, I can't say sitting here, Chair, because I may have then to read the treasury regulations. If it was elevated at that time, it was not elevated to me, whether by the legal department that drafted the contract at that time or by our group HR. But the nature of the program, I don't think, Chair, that it required that, no.
Well, maybe let me ask this question. Do you have a recollection whether the legal department at PRASA had an